I'm Andy Fitzell, your co-host, alongside Steve Smith. And in this episode, we are talking about a teaching and playing tennis legend, Welby Van Horn. Sydney Welby Van Horn.
Yeah, we talked about Jim Verdick. We have 8 pillars for the Great
Yeah.
Tennis Intelligence Applied. We list 8 coaches. We went through one pillar earlier, Jim Verdick, and we've had some follow-up. I've communicated with his son, Doug, one of his former teammates, Steve Stanton, who's started a book. But for this, Welby Van Horn, Sydney Welby Van Horn, 1920, 2014.
Yeah.
We've done some work. I called up Manny Diaz, who grew up in San Juan, Puerto Rico, played as a junior under Welby, and he's been at the University of Georgia. He played there. He's been the head coach, NCAA championship coach.
Yeah.
Talked to Manny. I talked to Philip Eisenberg. Philip and Betsy, they owned the Welby Van Horn tennis camp. And then I talked to Ed Weiss. We'll go through more about them and what they had to say. Ed wrote the book, The True Master. Tell me, I've got it written down. He is a true master. Legends of the True Master, The Method of True Master.
Yeah.
I apologize not to have that just by memory, but why don't you tell us, so we've done a lot of homework. We've got 12, I have 12 type pages here.
Yeah.
The collector's item, tell the listeners about the record. I was telling Manny about it. He was excited to get a copy.
Yeah. I'll get him a copy, but really the book as well is becoming a collector's item. It's not easy to find. I picked one up years ago, for a pretty regular price, but now it's hard to find. So Welby's book, but then also, just recently, not too long ago, some months ago, I was scouring the internet and found an old record of Welby's. So
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, tennis fundamentals with Welby Van Horn, and it's from 1970, so 50 years ago, if my math is correct. But so we listened to that over the last few days. So we didn't have a record player, so I went on to that famous online store, Amazon, and was able to pick up a little record player that will transfer it over to MP3 as well. So we've got it digitized. It was fun to listen to, to hear Welby's voice, and he was being interviewed, and then the first side he goes through the backhand, the forehand, and the serve, just fundamentals. It was great.
Yeah, the Welby Van Horn formula.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. What was that formula?
The formula.
Go through it.
It's balance, it's grip, it's stroke, it's strategy.
Yeah.
What I did at the top, I have at the top of my notes is Welby's playing background. I don't think anyone, arguably in the history of tennis, has been as great a player and then turned around and had such a great career as a teacher.
Yeah.
But he's 1920, born in Los Angeles, grew up in Southern California. Same age group as Jack Kramer. He's a year younger, 11 months. He played doubles with Kramer. When they were still juniors, they were playing among the best in men's doubles. They get the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open, lost the team that won it. In 1939, Welby was in the U.S. Open final, 19 years old. And that record was broken in 1990, youngest U.S. Open finalist.
Yeah.
Pete Sampras won the tournament in 1990, and he was coached during the tournament by Joe Brandy,
Right.
who was one of Welby's students.
Yeah, it's cool. The connection.
But 1939, so you have to be thinking World War II. Welby had a chronic asthmatic condition, and during World War II, he was stationed in a military factory, opposed to going to combat, and that actually affected his amateur status. Because he taught tennis, he was considered a professional.
Yeah.
Listeners need to really think about, or especially the young listeners. So the world stopped. There was just very similar to the pandemic this year, where there was no Wimbledon. But
Right.
For several years, 4 years, the world shut down and people weren't playing tennis. But Welby his father died when he was 13, didn't really have any money. He, as a tennis player, I mean, he was a great athlete. He was asked to try out or play with the Boston Red Sox organization as a pitcher. But tennis was his thing. And so the barnstorming days, like Kramer, for example, he had his 100-match series with Riggs and a 100-match series with Gonzalez. But Welby was on the outside of it because, from the ages of 19 to 31, started teaching tennis full-time at 31. He was really in the top 8 in the world.
Right.
But that didn't put him in those barnstorming, where they just two players would just travel with, the story where they take the tennis court and they take the bus and the tractor trailer and they unroll the mat, the tennis court, and they put it on an ice hockey rink. Put it on a gymnasium.
Yep.
But Welby did in 1945. There was a tournament for professionals. So the tennis didn't become a pro sport until 1968. So once you committed to playing professional, which he did at a very early age, you were not allowed to play the Grand Slams.
Yeah,
that's where tennis history is. Very, very complex.
Yeah,
now it's just based on who's won the most Grand Slams.
Yeah.
Years ago, there was many years where the top players, for example, they didn't go to Australia. I was talking to Philip Eisenberg. Nandan Ball was number 1 in the juniors in India, and this was at Welby's camp where I worked in Connecticut, the Choate School. Welby's 59. They played one set and Welby won. But there was some intimidation because in the warm-up, I remember Nandan, he missed one ball. And, in front of about 200-plus people, Welby gave Nandan a lecture on missing a ball in a warm-up. So, we in the audience was watching and listening to the whole thing.
That's great.
No instruction, though. He was really known as a stylist. He was a beautiful player. He played against all the greats. And he used to say that he thought Don Budge was the best. But even after the war, and when Kramer, Vic Braden, the late Vic Braden, you knew him so well, is that he was so close with Kramer. Yeah. Kramer was the best at that time, and he dominated Riggs. He dominated Gonzalez. But Welby played him in the 1948 World Professional Championships and lost to him in 5 sets.
Yeah.
But no, he was an excellent tennis player.
Solid player.
Yeah. I have in my notes. We'll go through more stories about how good a tennis player he was.
I think really too. There's not many players, top players like he was that go out and get into coaching, teaching, and work with beginners.
Yeah, no, it's pure.
I know we're going to talk about that, but
yeah,
that's what he did.
And that almost doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. People don't even want to teach beginners.
Exactly.
For people who understand American baseball, we talk about we need more first base coaches.
Right.
Some people are third base coaches. The person is right about to score, and that's the person who's out at the local tournaments handing out their business cards. But at the very elite level, like say a lot of the commentators on TV, they're always around the pros.
Yeah.
They end up coaching people who've already scored.
Yeah.
You said it one of the last podcasts I started coaching the player, or he started coaching the player when they were, 6th in the world and took them to the top 5. Yeah. One thing with a question that Welby used to always ask people, how do you develop a championship mind? Just having conversation, he would bring that up, and he was very interested in what people would have to say. But coming back to his level of play, Welby was always seeking a challenge. He would play left-handed. He actually played where he took a racket, had the racket strung, usually old Dunlop's Max Ply, 4 mains, 4 cross.
I saw someone hitting the other day on the internet. I saw somebody hitting with a racket that was that way, 4 and 4.
Yeah, it's a great teaching aid. One thing, speaking of teaching aids, I would recommend the tennis teachers take a racket out on the court, no strings, and toss balls, feed balls. Mm-hmm. And then you have the student go through, and there's no, fly away ball. Well, how they do?
Yeah.
So you actually take a racket with no strings, you toss the ball to the kid, and the adult. And, it's just like, okay, I'm going to toss you a volley. I'm going to toss you a forehand.
Yeah.
And then they're just focused on, grip, swing, body. They're not focused on, and we always tease, they're looking how they do. The ball's round, the ball's yellow.
Yeah. But I know one thing we talk about along those lines is getting out of the context of the court. I know we've got that somewhere here in our notes, but
yeah.
Just, okay, you turn around and hit ground strokes against the fence or serves against the fence. So you don't worry about the outcome.
For sure. Welby, when he was teaching to serve, you take people right up to the net. But Welby would teach at the tee line. That's in the notes as well. Mm-hmm. But, it's like a lump of clay. He's an artist. He's a sculptor, and he's maneuvering the students, the posture, every little movement, every little detail.
Yeah.
Vic Braden stayed on the same side of the net. As he used to say the net was the barrier. Just about every tennis teacher is going to start on the other side of the net, and it's a barrier, but you're right there on the same side of the net with them.
Easier to communicate.
Yeah, and then also too is that you're going to go over, and Vic used to say that you need to go over and kinesthetic learning is telling okay, close your eyes and take their hand and push it down.
Right.
But he would feed right up next to the net. The way Braden fed. Yep. Making sure the ball was really low. But Welby, just in getting someone to drop hit a ball, that's an art. And then feeding the ball. Don't toss the ball to someone. Okay, their contact points right here. Just drop the ball this way. Yeah. And don't drop it from a high position because then it's going to bounce from a high position. Yeah. Yeah. But Welby used to play kids, and he would play with no strings, and he would hit on the throat of his. That's how good he was. And he knew he had to make the adjustments with his feet. It's
like that wooden spoon that we purchased recently. I'm sure listeners seen that before, but that was the old wooden spoon. Yeah,
you bought that from the gentleman in Ireland, Functional Tennis.
Functional Tennis, have you?
I used to have, I was married for many years to a woman from Ireland, and I used to have hurling sticks. Yeah. And it was, I don't know if that's where the idea came from, but it's about 3 inches wide, and can you hit a forehand and backhand with this hurling stick?
In some ways, you just kind of think like it's almost like the pet rock. Like it's just a simple concept. It's a great tool.
I think it has a little more of a function than the pet rock, but
I mean it's just simple,
Yeah. With well beyond the competitiveness, whatever city Welby was in, he would go to the putt-putt course and ask what the record is. That's cool. I mean, he would play ping pong with kids. He would tie his shoes. He would play with his opposite hand. He'd find a kid who, not to pick on the kid, but the kid who's got the real thick Coke bottle glasses. He'd wear the kid's glasses. He'd spot the kid so many points.
Yeah. Makes me think about it. His question, okay, a championship mind or a champion mind, to be champion-minded. Overcoming adversity, loving competition. It sounds like, he loved to compete, and he had some adversity for sure growing up.
Welby became a great golfer. In fact, his system, I grew up around golfers. Not that I know anything about golf, but his balance system, it does. I mean, I've worked with many tennis players. I remember with Vic, a project we worked with the late Tim Gullickson, and I remember Gully saying, well, I don't know if this will help my tennis game, but it's going to definitely help my golf game. But Welby was a scratch golfer. There was times where he was the best golfer in Puerto Rico. Yeah. I remember Chichi Rodriguez became a really good professional from Puerto Rico.
Yeah, Chichi was fun to watch.
Well,
what was your, tell us about your connection with Welby.
Well, like everything, it's a story of circumstance. I touched upon that briefly in a previous podcast, but I worked for All American Sports. It was a company that was founded by Nick Bollettieri. Nick Bollettieri, before I worked for All American Sports, when I worked for All American Sports, Nick was no longer on staff, but he was in charge of the adults. Harry Hopman, they worked at the same facility, and Harry Hopman was in charge of the juniors. But Joe Brandy, his younger brother Andy, who like Joe has a long career in teaching and coaching now. Yeah. I was working at a junior camp, and it was at the Deerfield Academy, Deerfield Prep School. Beautiful place where I was. When I was a kid, I played hockey on that campus. So I just remember went down to the courts, and person in charge, Sace Maharaj, Smith, over here. I said, yeah, what's up? He said, you got to go pack. We're transferring you to an adult tennis camp. It was in Stowe, Vermont, where it was a pro tournament. And so it was just like, okay, pack your bags. And I had to go work at an adult camp. But Andy and Joe were there. And I just knew. I'd been in tennis for 5 years. And I just knew that their level of knowledge was so much different than anybody I'd met up to that point in tennis.
Yeah.
So I was just at that point well read. I had not. It was the following year was the first time I ever was. I worked for Andy the following year, and I just told him, I said, I'll work every day, but Braden's going to be in New York City for 4 days, and I need to go to that conference where he's speaking. And he said, yeah, sure. And so, but I thought Vic was the best. And I mean, I know by being in our library, I had all these cassette tapes and just, you learn from everybody. It was like, okay, but this guy is the go-to guy. Mm-hmm. And so Andy was telling me that Welby was the best. So at one point, I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and my father was saying that I was the smartest in the family because I was spending my winters in Florida and the summers in New England.
Yeah, exactly. Smart.
And tennis had boomed, and I could just some of the things with all American sports. You had, you all your meals at a fancy resort. You were okay. You're going to be endorsed with this racket, these shoes, these clothes. This is your salary. This is what you get for private lessons. And so if any father, my son is gainfully employed.
Yeah.
So I was there with All American Sports for 2 years, and I resigned. And at that point, I was single, and you couldn't be in charge of a junior camp if you're single. They were going to put me in charge of an adult camp. And even to the point where I had choices to go to Jamaica, to go to Amelia Island. And I was very young. And I told my father, I said, I'm not going to do that.
I can kind of see you in a Rastafarian getup.
And
that would have been a little different experience.
So my father said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to go work for Welby Van Horn. He has a summer camp. It's 8-10 weeks, whatever. And I said, what are you going to get paid? I said, almost nothing. And then what are you going to do after that? I said, I'm going to go to California, and I'm going to work for Vic Braden for free. Yeah, that's what
live in a van.
That's what I did.
Down by the river.
Well, I was already living in a van at one point. He knew that story because I went from, that's in these notes too. I went from tennis camp to tennis camp. Yeah. I was told that you had to learn how to play. So the first year I, did that, and
right.
Okay, I proved that I can play, as a solid amateur player, that I've done that as far as playing tournaments. But I knew I was in it to be a teacher and a coach.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. But it was just fantastic to go work for Welby. But I thought it was going to be one summer and done. Mm-hmm. And story of circumstance. Excuse me. Welby, actually the Eisenbergs and Welby became a partner in the camp. He was based in San Juan. We'll go through that. But so in the summers, the camp started in Choate, a prep school in Connecticut, but then it went to the Pinehurst Hotel. And my parents had retired about 5 miles from there. Mm. So then I went in the summers. And by that point, I got to the point, just 2 years from my time working with Welby, I was training tennis teachers in an academic setting. So they were hiring coaches I trained. Mm. So again, then from there, a few years later, I was running a tennis academy in Boca Raton. It's called Everett's, the Everett Tennis Academy. It was owned by Seguzo Bassett, but the Eisenbergs and Welby, they moved the camp from Choate to Pinehurst to the Boca Hotel. So I was in Boca. So I was around Welby at that point. And then even up to the point, Welby lived to be 94 years old. Yeah. But we'll go through that. As I spent time with him in his, it wasn't called nursing home, extended care.
Yeah.
So he had like a little apartment and I'll go through, sitting on the couch watching Roger Federer play with Welby Van Horn, watch a match on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, that's cool.
And he was still studying, and that's why he was so good, that he was critical of himself and critical of his system, and how could it be better.
What were some of the things or thoughts he had on Roger?
Well, talking to Ed Crass, there's information on Roger Federer's forehand in Ed's book on Welby. Welby, he missed the mark. He was so analytical, so intelligent, but he missed the mark on the forehand.
Yeah.
Not for teaching beginners. I don't think anyone, I've never seen anyone be able to mold a player. I've been using the Welby Van Horn system for a lot of years now. I'd have to count more than 40.
You're pretty old.
So,
Welby jokes, man. Come on. You're getting up there, though. You got a birthday this week.
Yeah, in Welby's day, wooden rackets, 3 out of the 4 Grand Slams were on grass. Mm-hmm. So he would call he said drop the names for grips, Eastern, Western. Forget those names. He'd say drop those fancy names.
Yeah,
and he had kids play with a solid Eastern grip when they were younger, but when they went older, he didn't have them go to go clockwise, counterclockwise. Instead of going this way, where people would get the racket face closed, he brought the hand up.
Yeah,
and he knew
towards continental.
Yeah, towards continental, and a combination of both, and. But, so many things changed. The racket changed, the surface changed.
Yeah.
But he knew even then, like say Becker, Becker would, he turned with the Eastern, and then he turned his hand a little underneath. And people at one point said you just couldn't play, even though there was Bill Johnson who played it. There's Big Bill and Little Bill. Bill Johnson had an extreme grip on the forehand side. But it wasn't considered to be the right approach for having an all-court game. It's interesting having to go to work for Welby. Eve Kraft, who was in charge of education and research with the USTA, she had written a book, and there was information in that book on Welby. Granted, I had, Andy Brandy. We were both, as I said, in our 20s. Welby's the best. I think Vic's the best. And so I said, well, I wanted to find out firsthand. It's like going to a movie. Someone says, it's a lousy movie. I'd much rather find out for myself.
Right. You see if the stove is hot.
Yeah. Then, even going to the library, like microfilm. But Frank DeFord, who's been a famous writer for years in sports, he wrote an article. There was 2 articles in Sports Illustrated, but one was on Welby Van Horn. It was all about his system.
It's fun to read those. You've got copies of those.
Yeah. Of course, in 1967, Charlie Passarelli was number 1. Arthur Ashe won the U.S. Open in 68. And this all started a little before my connection with Welby started a little bit before Arthur Ashe, who won Wimbledon in 75. But Arthur Ashe said, you could tell a Welby Van Horn student from a mile away. Dr. Alex Mayer, my oldest brother, who is a hockey specialist, written 10 books on ice hockey. He was doing a conference with Dr. Alex Mayer. Through that, I had a chance to talk to Alex Mayer, and I'm not the one who asked him this, but his 2 sons, Sandy and Gene, were top 10 in the world.
Yeah.
So he was considered one of the best tennis teachers in the world. But Alex Mayer, and I did find out through George Bay's show years later. I was just very curious. I never got to work for Alex Mayer. We could just talk about him sometime during a podcast. With the comment from Alex Mayer was that no one compares to Welby Van Horn.
Yeah.
He said, who are the best tennis teachers in the world? He said, well, he started naming people, and he said, and someone said, what about Welby? He said, oh, nobody compares to Welby. Mm-hmm. He stands alone.
Especially with Charlie Passarelli, running the tournament in Indian Wells.
Mm-hmm.
I spent so much time out there with Vic as well. but I was able to hit against Welby's wall, and it was just kind of fun for me knowing who Welby was through you and your connection with him. But
Welby loved backboards. Yeah, Welby's wall.
If anybody's been to that tournament, you see Welby's walls, Welby Van Horn, if you didn't know.
Charlie Passarelli, I would say that people would say he wasn't the fastest, but he hit the ball so well. He was, I believe, 99% sure he was Arthur Ashe's best man, roommates in college, teammates at UCLA. With Ray Moore, they basically, they built, and Welby lived out there at one point. And then, his son Stuart is in Florida, then Welby came. So when he was in Puerto Rico from 51 to 91, but then he went out to Indian Wells.
Yeah.
And then he died in 2014, but maybe the last 10 years of his life that he was in Florida.
Yeah. I wouldn't doubt that I probably saw Welby around the grounds there, but just didn't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. If you were in the Players Lounge, Welby holding court, there's a lot of people certainly that would have not wanted to hear what he had to say.
Yeah.
Dennis Vandermeer, his first wife, Linda, she was taught how to play by Welby. The first time I was trained, I went through a training session, Dennis Vandermeer's Tennis Universities. At the end, we'll talk about Dennis. He's one of our pillars. I learned so much from Dennis Vandermeer. So I raised my hand and said, at the end of it, I said, who else would you recommend that we study under? And I think Dennis was looking at me. I'm pretty sure, I'd bet that what his thought was, you don't need to study under anybody else. But he mentioned Welby and Tom Stowe. And by that time, Stowe, he died in 1984, but I mean, he's the person who taught Don Budge. But also Tom Stowe taught Dennis Vandermeer. But Welby, Dennis's teaching was really influenced. He knew Welby Van Horn, how Welby Van Horn taught tennis.
Yeah. I see that quote from Arthur Ashe, who's saying, you can tell a Welby Van Horn student from a mile away. Solid fundamentals.
Yeah, we use the FedEx logo. Once you see it, you always see it. The arrow in the middle. Even at like a coach's workshop that I know you've done many with me. We take take this red pen, fill it in. And, once you see it, you always see it.
Yeah.
But no, very efficient, effortless, smooth. The strength of the individual always comes out. On that record we were listening to, and that was fascinating to hear Welby say, the personality, the player will form their own style, their own tactics. But it really is just like teaching someone the alphabet. Okay, this is A. Do we agree this is A? This is the sound, and this is the shape. And
I think our critics kind of say the same thing about us. One, I think it's a positive where it's like, hey, you can tell a student of yours from a mile away just because of the fundamentals that are there. But they say the same thing. You're teaching everybody the same. And Welby got the same thing where it's like, hey, the fundamentals are the same, but they're not going to end up that way where they're exactly the same. They're going to be different. They're going to have their own style.
My connection with Welby, even letter writing, back in the day, it wasn't sending anybody a text. You'd write a letter. And it used to bother me as a young tennis teacher that people would say I taught everybody the same. I lived in Texas for 10 years. And Welby respected what we accomplished in Texas. It was very similar to what he did on a small battery of courts. So I take 4 players into a conference in Dallas. There's the Texas Tennis Association, the TTA, then the USPTA, maybe it's the TPTA, the alphabet soup. And I can remember taking Julie Scott, who played at Stanford. She stayed with a two-handed forehand, but it was high, low, high, inside out.
Yeah.
She played Wimbledon, the US Open, but she won all but 2 matches her last 2 years. So, but we weren't teaching everybody the same. If you get someone who's got a two-handed forehand, I remember Clayton Stanley. He was he was extreme. He was one of the 4 kids. He played at the University of Texas, and it wasn't really, he's not a really big guy, and his grip was extreme. But you can have your grip on say a semi-Western, but still have the racket in the wrist position, the elbow position.
Yeah.
But then when you turn, how you play with volley.
Yep.
Timmy Hurst, who played at SMU, he had an Eastern forehand grip. And then, Alyssa Kimmel was saying extreme. I remember those 4 kids, and she played at Illinois. But that was the whole thing, is that it's the same. Well, the application may be the same, but again, the strength of the individual comes out.
Yeah. No, I think, years ago I spoke at the tennis teachers conference at USTA in New York City. And one thing I was telling the group of coaches there was to try to have a system, have a plan, have an organized plan, right? That's the phrase we often use with system to define a system. It's an organized plan. And you can see with Welby, he had an organized plan. He had the track record of success. You can't deny it. And I think it goes down to, hey, I got people to follow some basic fundamentals, and it works.
Well, the term, you're so close-minded. Yeah, well, some open minds need to be closed for repairs. A system, I've said before in these podcasts, my oldest brother was studying hockey systems. What we've done is we put together a system of systems. And it's still open to tweak and, listen to this person, listen to that person. And I mean, there's so much, just say with fitness or what people now are doing with computers to chart. There's so many different ways to improve. Yeah. But with Welby's system, the fruit of his labor, it just didn't, like anything, he went down there at age 31, 1951. The results came towards the end of that decade. Mm-hmm. But his system was it was original. It was really based on his thoughts and his background. And you got to remember his background. I mean, here's a guy who, played against Hode, played against Gonzalez. He just was right there playing against the best, grew up in Los Angeles. But he based it on balance. And he was so into stage development and how to win in the different stages. Yeah. And not to win where... we tease and we say a 12 and under player, okay, they're going to use the Hawaiian grip. They're going to hang on to it this way. It's, it might be good for banging a frying pan against a wall, but, they're going to shovel their two-handed backhand. They're going to have the pizza palm up on the serve. Right. They're going to lollipop, loop the ball over the net. They're going to never come to the net. Yeah. And they're going to cheat like crazy. And they become a human scoreboard. It's like the really good 12-year-old. You just know, and it's not the etiquette. It's not their turn to serve, and their opponent is serving. Love 30. Yeah. And they get the voice. Yeah. But no, that was not Welby's idea of stage development, but clean. And people say the word clean. You don't have any holes. Yeah. You don't have any
moving parts.
Exactly. Efficiency, the least amount of moving parts, least amount of muscle recruitment.
I like the word formula. You use that word in the record.
No, formula. The 4 steps. I mean, I say that, my influence is so deep with people like Welby. 2 + 2 equals whatever you want it to be in tennis teaching. We always tell people, can we agree that the tennis court's a rectangle? Can we agree that water runs downhill instead of uphill? But no, definitely this is the step. And, Welby, if you cannot control your body, you can't control your grip, you can't control your swing, you can't control the ball. Yeah. So he was a balance fanatic. Footwork was balance. For Welby, when he would teach a pivot, he would just have the players stay completely sideways, both feet together, and just step straight up. Yeah. So it wasn't a matter of a unit turn. He didn't overemphasize the knee bend. He used to say that people looked like the character that Groucho Marx played, where he bent over at the waist and ran across the stage.
Yeah, I think some people would have to Google Groucho Marx.
Groucho Marx. So he had a different pivot on how you would teach a beginner. In the posture, you start upright, you finish upright. It's not a matter, you got to use your legs, you got to load and explode. And, he definitely was an artist.
Let me teach you to crawl first, and then you can.
Yeah, Welby is.
You can walk, and you can speed walk.
No, he would say you got to crawl, walk, run, then jump. Yeah. He added that, and with you can improvise within a fundamental range of correctness. Yeah. So you have to have fundamentals. Yeah.
On his on the record, he talked about the mistakes that amateur players make, and one of them was to try to basically copy the pros. And he was just saying, look, the pros have spent years and years and years mastering these fundamentals, so they're able to improvise. They're able to violate, and that's the word he used, violate some of those basics.
Yeah.
But really, just the idea is they can improvise. The speed of the game calls for that.
Yeah, not to rush the process.
Yeah.
The first lesson, I remember Dennis Vandermeer, he first mentioned Welby to me. And then years later, I mean, he knew that I had, spent so much time with Welby over the years that with the first lesson, you don't use a racket.
Yeah.
And the start of the second lesson, and towards the end of the second lesson, he's had hands on your hips, and he's just showing you, this is the body balance. This is how you will end up on a forehand volley. This is how you'll end up on a forehand ground stroke. And he's so big on slowing down, self-evaluating. So he was teaching people to be an independent thinker, problem solver.
Yeah.
With the great ones, I think in, fundamentals or in the teaching of fundamentals, there's always more similarities and differences.
It's funny. I was thinking about the fact that, people didn't play right away. There's a movie, I'm a movie buff. There's a movie, Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Yeah. I love that movie.
Josh Waitzkin has a great book, actually, The Art of Learning. You could check that out. He talks about the same thing, really slowing down in that book. But in the movie, they hire the chess teacher, and the dad's like, so did you guys talk about chess or whatever? And he goes, no, it didn't come up. And so he just spent the first lesson was really just getting to know the kid and whatnot. But it made me think of that. It's like, so did you talk about that? No, it didn't come up.
The 3/8 system of balance, Welby from the top up, top down, I should say, bottom up, head, hips, heel, hips, head. Welby actually, the people I've taught to teach tennis, they're going to say heel, hips, and head. But Welby, for the most part, would teach how to keep your head still. Yeah. With the heel represents weight transfer, the hips, the kinetic chain, body rotation, and the head evenly distributed between your shoulders. I think of the great Jack Nicklaus, the golfer, and his father was his first coach, and people said to him, how do you keep your head so still? He goes, that's easy. Every time when I was a kid, every time I moved my head, my father would pull my hair.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but static balance, Welby, you cannot have static balance if you can't control your head. You think of most kids, they're yanking their head. Lenny Schloss has done so much with the Billie Jean King eye coach. A lot of positives where the brain is ahead of the hand. So they made all the competitions. They think they made the hit. They sneak a peek.
Yeah. So
it's really the brain first, the eyes second, the head. And then the head's like a bowling ball. It's inch for inch the heaviest part of your body.
Right.
Welby thought that, like a fashion model, you need to walk, you keep the book on your head. And but static balance, that's how Roger Federer started.
Yeah.
And that's almost like a lost form of application, is to have people stand in one place.
Yeah, it's not the thing that's exciting and fun, and that's the challenge. I get messages online where people, it's got to be fun. You got to keep it fun, and it's true. But I think that's where keeping a score and having targets that can help make some things like this fun.
Yeah,
that's where the coaching comes in. You got to make it fun.
You got to have a form tournament. Hit, hold. I spent 10 years in Tyler, Texas, 81 to 91. We became a pretty big time program because we had students from, like over 40 states and over 30 countries. I'd have to look that all out. But people from all over the world came to study tennis. They had an excellent tennis program. It was pretty much like an immigration center at one point. There's no Americans playing, but they won title after title, junior college nationals. Not to digress, but one thing actually back then and to this day, junior college tennis. Here in Florida, there used to be 32 men's teams.
Yeah.
Now there's 32 junior college men's teams. But the schools in California, they never played nationals. For 4 years, I was a tournament director of the NJCA Nationals.
Why was that?
Where was it?
Why was that? Why didn't they play nationals?
Funding with junior college, but their tournament, back in the day, that it would be interesting who would have won. The team that won the other 49 states, or California just had their own tournament, and it would have been really interesting which team would have won. Funding, but they just didn't play. It was like, okay, we're just staying. There's so many, like University of California at Los Angeles. They're just, like where I grew up in New York State, the population is large, so there's SUNY schools, State University of New York.
What was the other UCLA? We had a student, boy, we were working with.
I talked to him the other day. Spencer Johnson going to UCLA, and I said, "Yeah, Union." This comes from Mark Hamlin, one of our coaches. My players play UCLA, Union College, Lower Alabama, which there's no such school, but not to pick on Southern Alabama. Coming back to Welby on balance. Anchor foot, adjustment foot. I think one thing that you hear today all the time is the pros, they only hit open stance. You don't want to square out.
Yeah.
You've got to hit every stance. When I was a kid, we were always told, so I was shot left-handed in hockey. You always have to shoot off this skate, your front skate. And I remember one time being at a practice, my father ushered us all off. It was great. And the Russians were having a puck pass to him from the corner, and they sat on their fanny and shot the puck. So you have to, shoot a puck, hit a tennis ball. You have to be able to do it, open stance, semi-open, square, closed. You have to be able to do it all. Yeah. Where people actually have that front foot and they swivel it, that's called no forehand. And you see that so many times. The back foot can be the anchor foot, but then the front foot becomes the adjustment foot. Or where you balance, like when you slide, the front foot is a sliding foot, but the back foot's a brake foot. So you really have to think of both feet. And a Welby-ism is that you have to train to the point where you can learn to be on balance when you're in off balance position. But the front foot is the stepping foot's the anchor foot, the adjustment foot,
the back foot.
Yeah, where you are with, that's what we mean by the three system balance. Heel comes up. If the heel comes up, then the knee turns in, the hip turns in. That's the kinetic chain of the body working.
Right.
Excuse me again. It's a linkage system with the direction of your foot. Welby's going to want to have, when as a right hander, when you hit a forehand, your front foot is going to be pointing at 1 o'clock. It's not going to pull out here to 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then, with Braden, with the science, if someone's hitting a serve and their front foot's going this way, it's like, well, that's going to cost them about 30 miles per hour.
Yeah, you got opposing forces going on.
Yeah. With,
and on the backhand side, you're going to go the opposite, 11 o'clock.
Yeah, and it was interesting working with Welby initially. You think about, there was two-handed players in years gone by, but when tennis boomed, because James Van Allen invented the tiebreaker in 1970, so then the sets were shorter and tennis could be put on TV. There's all these one-handed backhands.
Yeah.
The two-handed backhand was unique, like, whoa, what are they doing? But then Connors was kind of like the Muhammad Ali of the tennis boom. He just came, there was the Bobby Riggs, Billie Jean King match. So it was a tiebreaker, and then the Battle of Sexes.
Yeah.
But then Connors and then Everett, they were America's sweetheart. And Jimmy was just, who is this guy? He broke the country club mold. But they were both two-handers.
Yeah.
But and Welby would do that with sequences of photos of both Jimmy and Chrissy. You just watch their feet. That's where they didn't have to be Welby Van Horn students.
Yeah.
And, I think that's, you think back, I had a chance to spend 3 days one time with Jimmy Everett, and there was a lot more similarities among tennis teachers. Tennis teachers were off on a few things. The grip on the forehand. Talked to Manny Diaz about that today. But now it's almost like, well, in junior tennis, all they have is a forehand. It's like Ivan Lendl said about Agassi at one point. He's a forehand and a haircut.
Yeah.
But Agassi, I mean, he was so good with his swings, forehand and backhand. So that means he takes care of the return. What didn't have the best serve? He had 2 second serves. But yeah, ball striking. When you just think of the shape of the swing, and there's so many similarities. You just think from going from like a Connors to an Agassi.
Agassi's, his serve improved over the years. I remember one time Vic and I it was a late night at the Indian Wells tournament. We were watching in the stadium, just kind of towards the top. We just stopped off to watch a little bit. And Andre was playing, and he hit this serve. He bombed the serve, it was like 129. For him, it was pretty good, 129. We both turned and looked at each other at the same time, and we go, did you see how far in front that toss was? He got his toss way out in front.
What I was going to say, though, when you think about Agassi, it's, he changed his serve. It's really more he changed his toss. Yeah. Because he had a continental grip. He had the swing. Yeah. So he was really in the ballpark. But the way tennis is, it's not very forgiving. Very forgiving from as far as the score is concerned. You could be down, lose first set 6-love, down 4-love, and you could still win the match.
Yeah. But I remember that. It was kind of fun, Did you see how far in front that was?
With someone that we spent quite a bit of time with, Steve Denton, was playing doubles against Agassi and Krickstein. And, Denton played with Curran, and they did really well, playing for the University of Texas, and so many stories. But so Agassi, he tosses the ball over his head, playing a pro doubles match, and stays back.
Yeah.
And Denton, to intimidate him, of course, he's just a teenager coming up. Denton's on his way out, and Agassi's on his way up. And, Steve was a big-time doubles player. And Denton catches the ball and just goes, really?
Agassi won Kalamazoo Junior doubles, 16s.
Well, I mean, it's great to get to Kalamazoo. I love Kalamazoo, but when it comes down to it's still junior tennis for the most part. Yeah. If you play pro-style tennis, it takes longer. That's something like Welby was definitely training people to play all over the court.
Right.
Even though when you listen to Welby, when kids were younger, he didn't want them to play on the rise. He wanted the ball to bounce, the speed and spin to dissipate, to have the ball turn over, because there's less spin on it. And he didn't want to have kids rush to the net, because if you don't have volleys, it's like, no, you're going to stay back and you're going to rally. Yeah. One thing, he only had 4 tennis courts at the Caribbean Hilton. And I taught for him other places. I was never there, but to hear all the stories. But the tropical rains is that the kids would go out and play touch tennis, little tennis, mini tennis. You can't hit the ball hard.
Yeah.
And, the court was a little bit slick. But Welby, in the end, it was all about being a complete player. There would be no one up, one back doubles. Yeah. There would be no, there was no. It's just we teach basically so much the Welby Van Horn system. In the end, we say, okay, what's a negative of what we do? It's like we don't really allow for someone to have an unorthodox stroke.
Right.
Their style will come out, but it's not. I think, and that's. You think of someone like a Monica Seles, where she just hit against a wall with no lessons. Sure. Nadal really is someone. You think of Wozniacki recently. They didn't come from tennis information initially. They just hit a lot of tennis balls, and you can see where, like Djokovic, and Federer are more old school tennis, just from a technical standpoint. Yeah. I mean, Nadal. It helps that he's from another planet too. Yeah. He's such a super athlete.
Yeah, the character behind all that too.
Yeah.
Sporting family.
On ability, ball sense. I mean, Welby would have players, he just toss balls and let this ball bounce once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and you got to adjust your feet.
Yeah, I like that drill.
Always about doing less.
Great against the backboard too. Sorry to go back to that. The ball sense.
Oh, well, you just mentioned one of Welby's favorite drills is get an old ball and just would tell people you're not good enough to hit against the backboard with 1 bounce. Yeah. It has to bounce twice. What are you doing? You just, you got to hit, hold, self-evaluate, Not overhitting, play within yourself.
Yeah.
Not to rush the process.
Yeah. And just listening to his record, he talked about, when he talks about strategy, and Vic Braden was kind of the same way. It's like, look, when you're a beginner, intermediate player, your strategy is just to get the ball over the net and deep down the middle. There's not a whole lot else you need to do. You don't have strokes, so
yeah,
you're not going to have to do anything too complicated.
No, that's in my notes. At one point, Vic wanted to learn about Welby, and Welby wanted to learn about Vic. Initially, Welby thought that Vic was a promoter. He was an entertainer.
Yeah.
But again, so many similarities. With Welby, on ability to know where you are, to know where your racket is, just that racket head awareness.
Yeah.
Here's it's interesting for Welby, an ability is to play the way you're taught.
We use that all the time outside. With the players here.
Here's an ability,
play the way you're taught,
or an inability. Can you follow directions? Mm-hmm. If someone's going to get A's in school, they got to follow directions. Mm-hmm. And Welby would talk about a sixth sense for athleticism, for your sport or for other sports. And he grew up in a time where kids played every sport. I remember asking him about the overhead. He never missed an overhead. I said, Welby, tell me, how did you learn to hit an overhead like that? And he just said, Steve, when I was a kid, there was no TV.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer.
And he would practice all day. And how he practiced, we could go through his personality. You have to get to the point where you can enjoy your own company. And, so it's like you have to be able to be lonely. Kids are always talking to one another, and it's like, uh-oh. Yeah. People don't understand the method of madness. I'm always trying to get kids to stop talking. Can they actually go over and do anything on their own? Like a total extrovert, they're going to, kids are practicing on their own. It's kind of before the official practice starts, and someone shows up. The extroverts come off the court, just like, well, I guess go over there. Yeah. It's like, well, why?
Just keep that party going.
You saw him yesterday. Do you really have to stop what you're doing? But Welby would go out, and we call it, can you cook a pancake? So you just take your racket, can you throw a ball up? We have kids do it as a partner, but just self-feed the lob. Mm-hmm. And you move around, and then you hit, and just over and over again.
You think Welby was an extrovert or introvert?
Well, he was an introvert, but the thing is that introverts, as you know more about it than I do, if they're comfortable with the people they're with, and they're comfortable with the subject, the introvert seems like an extrovert.
Yeah.
But no, and it's not, are you gregarious, are you outgoing? And we talked about getting into that in full detail for a podcast.
Yeah.
It's where you get your energy.
Yeah.
Grips, I mentioned that Welby, no fancy names. Mm-hmm. It sounds like the airlines.
Yeah.
There used to be Eastern Airlines, Continental Airlines, Western Airlines.
Yeah.
And we could get into the history of why those names are there, and but Welby's like, it doesn't make sense. They say, this is a Continental kid, and the kid's 7 years old. You can just tell kids, tap your racket like a hammer.
Yeah.
Tap the racket on edge. Put the racket like this. With you can call it the spin grip. Mm-hmm. Instead of the forehand is the flat grip.
Yeah.
With beginners, switch grips. Back in the day when I first started playing, and I was not someone who learned as a child, but I can just remember being told, one grip, it's simpler. You just think, from a tennis standpoint, could you have been told anything that's dumber? Just use one grip, it's simpler. Welby would have kids choke up. I have a tape that was sent to me by one of my students, and it was Welby Van Horn is on this tape. I'm sure you would like to hear the tape. So it's just one question. I thought it would be like, okay, here's an hour of Welby. It's one question. And Welby was asked, what is the best tennis tip that you could give someone? And he said, well, when you're a beginner, choke up quite a bit on your racket. And then when you're older, you still choke up on your racket. It is the butt cap. Mm-hmm. Welby would, tell people to tape the end of the racket. Not too much to make the racket imbalanced or heavy, but the fatty tissue, the bottom part of your hand, is not off of the racket.
Yeah.
There's more power sources. Granted, if you, put the butt cap right in the middle of your palm, and now you have a longer lever, it seems very loose. But the best players, they definitely have their hand on the racket, all on the racket. But why he liked that is when his kid is learning and they're choking him the racket, instead of getting like, you go in the pro shop. It used to be Pete Sampras. Now it's Roger Federer. You see a poster, a life-size poster, and you could buy a 17-inch racket, an 18-inch racket, a 19-inch racket. That's just marketing.
Yeah, sure.
And it was so much better years ago. The wooden racket, the kids would just, they cut off part of the handle. It's interesting too, like with snow skiers. The ones that were always having customized skis and said, hey, just here are these hand-me-downs. I think the hand-me-downs is also, there's probably a hungrier kid who just didn't go out and get the brand new skis. So I'm sure there's a lot more to that. But so if you choked up on your racket and you do this with your wrist on the forehand, the butt hits your wrist.
Yeah. So if you fold your wrist forward, the butt cap will hit your wrist.
The same thing on the serve. With, Welby on grip change, it's slight, but it's significant. Just how, he was very good at explaining things.
Yeah.
It's a slight grip change, but it's significant. And so, he was well aware that as you became older and stronger and you from the service line in, you weren't going to have an Eastern forehand and Eastern backhand. But we'll get more into the grips with some of these notes. Some of them are fun. But like, you're so big on where the heel pad is. So the heel pad, when you hit a volley, the upper part of your hand, that's where the Australian grip was called the composite. So it's not that it's a true continental grip. You adjust your hand slightly. Yeah. And he's always about soft hands. He would say you won't be able to hit the delicate shots. You don't hear that word anymore.
Yeah, we put up a video today on our Instagram you could check out, which was basically talks about this finger, 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 thumb, finger.
Finger, 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 thumb, finger. Welby, it's all how you talk to a kid. And, you wouldn't go catch a ball like this. You're going to catch a ball like this.
Yeah, but you're just showing the fingers spread out.
Yeah.
If you want to see what we're doing, you just got to watch it on YouTube. All right, listeners?
A loose grip, not a tight grip. Not only a loose grip so you can change your grip, but so your whole arm is loose. You're loose in your shoulder. Think of a wandering thumb. Not to have the thumb up the racket where that was taught before Welby's time. That's how it was taught by many people on the backhand side. But, you just think, okay, my thumb's going to move a little bit. Instead of just always going about where the knuckles are.
Right.
The thumb's got to move. This is the large part, the thenar, the large part of your thumb.
Look at you and these fancy words, man.
Yeah. Like my last name, Smith. It's fancy. The knuckles almost on top.
Yeah.
With, I think of Vic, when he became so popular on TV, and, he used to say, backhand is 1, the serve is 2, the forehand's 3.
Yeah.
But there's Vic Braden, the resource, and then Vic Braden, the man. I think it's great that if people read his books, there's a difference between, reading the book and living the book. Vic Braden, the man, it was on the backhand's on the right side of 1. But also in the details, if you turn and you get your arm on the inside and you get your racket lower, the people who don't turn sufficiently and don't get the racket low sufficiently, that's where they start using a complicated grip, a grip that's too far over.
Yeah, kind of a motorcycle grip, the fist grip. Yeah,
and you don't hear people talk about, well, it's an extreme grip on the forehand. They don't pick up, that's an extreme grip on the backhand.
Yeah.
And, so many club players, if they have an extreme grip, they lead in with their elbow. That makes me think of Ed Faulkner's book. Still the only book I know of where there's photo sequences of club players and they're telling you the flaws of the club players, which is so smart.
Yeah.
Instead of, well, we're going to just look at pictures of the very best players in the world.
Right.
As you know, there's so many people that have been successful with online tennis instruction websites, and they go out to Indian Wells where it's ideal, and they can do it elsewhere, but that's where it's Didn't you say the ATP is kind of putting a stop to that, where they film the players?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, they caught off pretty much everybody but myself and Vic and John Yandel.
WTA as well, right? All the same.
Yeah.
Interesting thing about discipline. Welby, we'll get into it. He taught privates. His camp, he taught groups, but for the most part, you took privates, and that system, different times where, if you take a private from Welby, you're hitting the backboard for 30 minutes. You take the private, and then you stood right on that same court in shadow swinging in his pro shop window.
Yeah.
So that's really like an hour and a half. And then the kids would play lots of mini tennis, but he had a perfect setting.
I just, real quick, I mean, that's amazing because we haven't talked about that yet, right? How his lessons went. Can you imagine today if a kid shows up for a lesson, you go, okay, here's what you're going to do. First, you're going to hit against the backboard for 30 minutes. Then you're going to take a half-hour lesson, and then you're going to shadow swing in front of the window. Not happening.
Yeah, there's so many stories. But when he started when he was 31, I mean, you're the best player on the island.
Yeah.
And
so you're going to listen.
Yeah, especially if the guy can beat you left-handed and he can beat you with no strings. and,
exactly.
But
the parents have to have been like, "Whoa, what's going on?"
Once you get one kid to play, then the next kid to play, and kids regulate kids. If you can look to your left and look to your right, Bollettieri did that out of environment.
Yeah.
Welby did that out of education.
Right.
And it's amazing that it was just the club kids. It's just from 600 families at this one club.
We talk about that all the time. Like, here's how you get fired at a regular country club or.
Mom, I don't like that coach. He told me I have no forehand. Yes, we'll go find a new coach. But Welby really thought that the discipline, it really comes from the parents. You certainly can always talk about going back in time, that a kid is still a kid, but the times were different. And there's so many ways you can explain it, but so by the time I was a kid, affluent people would have one TV, and there was, before PBS, there was only ABC, NBC, CBS, and you only had cartoons on Saturday morning.
Right.
And it was early. And then if you got involved, like I did in ice hockey, that you didn't watch cartoons, you were outside, and
right.
The really little kids, that's when they got the ice time. But everybody knew, okay, Saturday morning only. But now kids are walking around with a phone in their pocket. They watch cartoons all day long. Yeah. You got to just push a few buttons.
TV.
Checkpoints. Say it over and over again through this podcast. Slow down, self-evaluate, freeze. Your body.
Yeah.
Which position is your body in? And, where's the racket? The follow through is the end product of the swing. Where you finish. So you're going to start on a forehand club. You're going to start at 2:00. Of course, now kids have fancy digital clocks, watches. But you go from 2:00 and you finish at 11:00. Over here, you're at 10:00, and you finish over here at 1:00.
Yeah.
That's with the relaxation as you turn. But you have that archway still. You're not breaking your wrist.
Right.
That's something that was so important with Welby, is not to collapse the wrists. With like how the racket ends up on the serve. Welby on the serve, he would tell kids, put the racket in the tray position, toss, and tap.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. I first saw that, I was, no way. This way the guy's teaching the serve. But he taught beginners to do that, and he was so smart, so creative. In fact, that's what Manny Diaz said. I said, tell me a few things about Welby. First thing he said, so intelligent, so creative. That Welby would even let kids serve on 4, which naturally little kids can have the racket on 4. They're going to pick it up. It's going to be on 4, semi-Western grip, and they're going to be like this. But then you'd get him on 3, and he called that the beginner's grip. Mm-hmm. But how he did it, here's your stance, here's your body position, here's your toss, tap, hold your balance. So he taught everything, but then he can say, okay, this is the championship grip, and how he had to go from in to out, and that's very difficult for people to conceptualize.
The body sideways.
Yeah, the body changes, but So then from the standpoint, if you know Welby's system, I had a lot of fun over the years in a PE class. Okay, I'm out here by myself. And when I was training tennis teachers, many times I would have tennis teachers on the bleachers and I would teach, okay, here comes a PE class with 20 plus. Mm-hmm. I'm going to teach the 20 plus by myself. Mm-hmm. And you can teach to serve that way. Yeah. It's like, okay, and you just get it in the ball in the box. Kids not discouraged. Well, Welby did discourage people competing. I mean, the word he had was, it's just ridiculous. So everybody wants to play and keep score. And Welby was, okay, by the time you're 8 years old, you should be establishing your base. And by the time you're 10, you can start to play. Mm-hmm. This thing about being a teenage sensation, I think that really, the Tiger Woods phenomenon is that, okay, we have to be great by the time if you can get on YouTube and just type in Tiger Woods, Mike Douglas, he's 3 years old and he's cracking golf balls on national TV. Yeah. The one-hander, Welby would use the fence. And the thing is, there's more body rotation on the one-hander, so you're 24 inches from the fence. Mm-hmm. But when you hit your forehand, you stand right against the fence. And your backswing shouldn't hit the fence, and your follow-through shouldn't hit the fence. Yeah. Coming back to the two-handed backhand, it's a left-handed forehand. So the balance points are all the same. Yeah. If someone tomorrow wanted to look at the Welby Van Horn body balance system, they could just go to our website. It's free, GreatBase. Go to Tennis Intelligence Applied, and then just look for body balance positions. Yeah,
you can find that on the YouTube channel as well. Just
coming back to the serve, Welby would call that the tray position. So eventually he would get players to go to a continental grip. Welby, we tell kids there all the time, and Welby was one to say, okay, both palms are down when you serve. But initially he would just tell people, here's a glass, hang onto a glass of water. Yeah. But he would get a cup and he'd have the kids go just like this, slow. Mm-hmm. You don't let go of the ball to the shoulder level. And you're going to toss out at 1 o'clock. Yeah. It was all for Welby. He just knew, okay, you're going to go with that swing. And it's like, okay, this is the body balance position. This is the grip. This is the swing. It wasn't about, okay, let's play. Yeah. Again, the USTA in this country, they do so many things well as far as trying to do right for the game, but it's not play to learn. You can approach it that way in certain aspects, but it's really learn to play.
Yeah, learn to play, and you can have fun doing it. Like you said, there's all kinds of creative ways. It's really just the art of coaching. You got to make it fun and make it creative and interesting. And
Peter Burwash, the personality of the pro. You got to be able to deliver the sauce. One thing that happens with young coaches, young tennis teachers, coaches, is Welby would just tell parents and players, you got to get through the drudgery. It's not okay. How much fun can you make learning fundamentals? But with that, is the kid kind of looks at the coach and the kid goes, I'm kind of bored, and the coach they just abandon ship and okay, let's do this. Yeah. And then it's organized chaos. There's no structure. And then at the end, when someone says ready, play, no one can play. And so many kids start tennis, they leave tennis. And I think a lot of times coaches are going, well, they didn't work very hard. And I'll get myself in trouble, but you can take small cities and you take big clubs, and some are not producing one quality tennis player per year.
Now, you said it the other day. We had one of our students play a tournament and did pretty well and beat up on some kids. And you said, it's probable that a couple of those kids are just going to stop playing. They're going to quit.
Yeah, no, little girl wins 6-love, 6-love, and most likely the kid that she was playing with, statistically could quit. Mm-hmm. I thought you were going to say a week before a young kid won a tournament, and instead of congratulations, that is like, if you did what I told you, you could have beat that kid a year ago. Yeah. And I think sometimes the parents might just start walking backwards, like, that wasn't very nice. No. It's, if you had listened, and if they stop and think, well, I just won a tournament, maybe I'm going to continue to listen to this guy more. Yeah. But, give me the high five. And
also it's because with the players that come and see us, and I'm sure listeners out there are the same thing, the players that tell you their goals and they tell you they want to play at a high level college or they want to play pro tennis with a dream. And it's like, okay, we're going to take you to that level.
Well, I think also too is the tennis parents, Vic used to always say this, the socioeconomic functioning levels. Most tennis teachers could not afford their own lessons. Right. So, unless the parents had inherited the money, they're very intelligent, but they haven't taken, most likely, they haven't taken a tennis player down the road.
Yeah.
So they're newbies at it. And yet, a lot of times parents are going to look at you cross-eyed and say, did he really ask that? I said, this is your first trip down this road. And, it takes 10 years to learn how to play. It takes 10 years to learn how to teach. And, parenting, that's a whole different ball of wax. But, typically, same thing. By the time a parent, if they've had their kid in the game for 10 years, they've learned so much.
Yeah.
They've learned so much. On the serve, Welby, the human element is, he would say, you want to try to hit your serve no higher than you can reach, the apex. Yeah. But the human element is that's going to vary from about 6 inches.
Right.
But it's like, no, it's not going to be exactly in the same place every time, but it's close.
Yeah.
Going through these notes, strategy, stages, Welbyism, let the other guy blow it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let the ball drop, let the ball descend. You don't hit on the rise in early stages. He would have his young players play defense as far as a full court's concerned. I'm talking, and this is something that Welby was a big plus for him, as at the Kirby Hilton where he worked, he had hotel guests. And the hotel guests would come out and ask for matches. Mm-hmm. And they say, we got a match. And there's this little 9-year-old who'll play you. And the hotel guests would look at Welby, and then Welby, he'd say, well, would you like to wager? He'd get usually the men as well as he'd get. Yeah. And so there was extra income for Welby. His young players, they won a lot of matches against the hotel guests. Again, mini tennis promotes all court play. To me, I think when you watch Federer, it looks like he is playing mini tennis.
Yeah.
That is, here in the United States, the kids from up north, where court time is so expensive and so precious, a lot of times the kids indoors, they don't play enough mini tennis. But I think also too now is that kids don't hang around tennis courts.
Yeah.
And mini tennis is a lot of fun. One thing about here at our tennis house, we have chess tables and kids will play chess, and we've been observing that for years and years. And one kid beats the other kid, and they just realize, okay, you're better than me.
Yeah.
But in tennis, their ego's too big. It's like, well, I lost you today, I'll beat you tomorrow. Yeah, and it's like, no, with Welby's training, it's like, you could beat that guy, but it might take you 18 months. Mm-hmm. And that's like eternity. But with, just understanding stage development.
Yeah.
But mini tennis, when kids play, let me take it back a step. You have a group of kids go out and play ultimate frisbee. They play, say there's 12 kids go play soccer. Mm-hmm. And then it's lunchtime. And they had a great time, great workout, it's fun. And when they go to lunch, they're coming back after lunch. They don't even know who was on their team. But if the same 12 kids play a set, it's amazing. You say, I'll play, go play, and then it's match. They look at you, we're playing a match, and you just see them lock up. And it's like, loosen up, kid. Here's a Welbyism, don't try to hit one ball hard. How we say that is if you try to hit the ball hard, you won't hit it right. If you try to hit it right, you'll be able to hit the ball hard. Yeah. Welby was very big into cadence. So, he would hit the ball and put it on a dime. And so he's hitting the ball and it's 1, the ball bounces, it's 2, the kid hits it to 3, and it's 1, 2, 3. And, he would just tap the ball. You see us do that all the time. You tap the ball. He's not going to hit the ball back. They have to correct. Mm-hmm. Welby would have kids shadow swing. Okay, shadow swing where you're off balance. Shadow swing, a lousy stroke. Now correct yourself. It's mistake correction. That's the process.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to do that in point play. And a kid needs to, quote unquote, be able to fix themselves.
Yeah. One thing I liked about we'll have to see if we can put this record out publicly. I don't know if that's possible with copyright, but after 50 years, maybe one thing he talked about as far as hitting the ball hard, going back to that just briefly, the word that he used was this stroke the ball.
Yeah, it's in my notes. It's in my notes. It's in my notes here.
Stroke the ball.
I'll scratch it off. But wait, Welby would say,
I blew it. Sorry. We'll get to that.
No problem. Welby would say, hey, kid, you have a dog? This is at his camp because obviously with his juniors and his club, he would know. But some kids there for the first week, hey, kid, you got a dog? And the kid would go, yeah. He goes, do you pet him like this? Or kid, can you pet your dog?
Yeah.
Can you do this?
Stroke the ball.
But with, for kids, Welby, go pick up 9 balls, put 3 at the net, 3 at the service line, 3 at the baseline, and then go drop hit those balls. That's where Vandermeer did. He learned so much from Welby, where Dennis would put 9 balls in a row. I mean, Dennis obviously learned so much from Tom Stowe as well. And he was so intelligent and so creative. But, go pick up 9 balls and this is what you got to do.
Yeah.
And then what you do is go pick up 9 more.
Yeah.
Go. And then, with, can a kid show and tell? Like, show me your forehand. And it's just, okay, this is my ready position. This is my turn. This is the shape of the swing.
Yeah, and you got to adapt. Swing up, at a steeper angle from all the different parts of the court. Adjust from where you are. Basic drill, but great.
With rhythm hitting, Welby at his camp, say you have 4 players on the court, 2 are up at the baseline, 2 are back. You're going to hit the player 1, and the other 3 players all have to shadow swing. And then they have to, all the players, they have to hold their position. Now, when you hit the other player, they all shadow swing. And it's just 1 ball. And, Welby's like, we don't need all these tennis balls. We're going to do this with 1 ball. Yeah. But then the teacher, it doesn't have to be a great player, but the teacher has to be able to have the skills just to do the tap hitting. And, Welby was not very happy if he was watching somebody who couldn't feed. It's like the beginning player, you have to just put it right where they need it. He loved backboards. We talked about the ball bouncing twice.
Yeah.
Hitting the backboard before the lesson. His eye, here's an example of Welby Van Horn's eye. And a lot of times cheerleaders, auctioneers, you think, that's it, you got it, nice, that's it, again.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And so many kids, on their forehand volley, they lengthen their arm up. So, something we say from Burwash study is bent to bent, start bent, finish bent. And Welby just knew when you have your arm straight, the racket face opens up. And he would just say, the kid's hitting the volley too far in front.
Yeah.
And then, as they straighten their arm out, racket face opens up, but then they change their footwork. So that the detail is, being diagnostic. There's knocking over the dominoes. You got to hit the volley. You don't hit it that far in front.
Yeah.
And this is what's going on. And you need to, and really you do volley with your legs. You got to be moving forward.
Yeah. If you volley too far in front, you're going to face forward as well. And then the racket tends to go down. That was one thing with we talked about the volley. Was that last week?
I'm
talking about the volley. We mentioned Charlie Hollis and his, the 6 laws of volleys, and his first one is to, try to play it out in front as far as possible, but you don't want to play it too far in front.
With, Welby, one little detail is off, everything is off.
Yeah.
Especially when you're learning the base, you got to learn clean. You got to this is, and actually, Welby's club kids versus his camp kids. So because he created that culture and the respect, he didn't do too much unteaching. 1951, 1991, same place. But in camps, it's really more you're subtracting movements versus adding movements.
Could his kids teach as well, like his students? Did he get them to teach, Was there?
Yeah, that's in the notes.
teaching?
It's a great question, and I'll scratch that off or even repeat it.
Yeah.
Phil Eisenberg's a lawyer. Now he's a real estate tycoon, but he was doing some work for the Puerto Rican government, and he found himself staying at the Caribbean Hilton, and he got to know Welby. But as the story goes, one of his friends was there, and Welby was given a lesson, but Welby had to take a phone call. So I call him in from the pro shop, and Welby says, "Oh, I apologize, I have to take this call." And obviously years and years before a cell phone. So Welby just called over one kid, some 10, 11-year-old kid, really young kid, and said, "Hey, I'll be right back. Help him with his forehand." Mm-hmm. And Phil Eisenberg tells a story where he watched this and he goes, "This guy needs to have a tennis camp." And actually, from a business standpoint, that's where Phil was looking at it, is it needed to be put in a bottle. We'll talk more about that when we talk about his tennis camp. Yeah. The Sports Illustrated article, Frank DeFord, the title was "The Right Way to Begin." What a great title.
Yeah.
There was another article in Sports Illustrated, Anyone Too Young for Tennis. And but again, Welby, initially in the USTA, in Puerto Rico as part of the USTA, the first ranking was for people 13 and under. Mm. Now by the time a kid's 13, they've played 5 years of awful tennis, really. Welby would say that 95% of people play at tennis. Mm. And, certainly the pace of the lesson changed, not the content of the lesson didn't change. So in the camp business, right, worked with a lot of recreational players. Right. Even as adult camp, Molly Nickel, I got to know Molly Nickel really well because I was traveling around going from tennis camp to tennis camp, and she wrote for Tennis Magazine. And she lived right by the Vic Braden Tennis College. So then later...
In Coda?
Yeah. So later, she had comps where she worked for Tennis Magazine. She could come to the Vic Braden Tennis College. I remember I saw her at 3 different places. It did 3 different parts of the country, but I wasn't at Welby's when she went to Welby's, but she wrote an article about the Welby Van Horn Tennis Camp. And I remember her saying, it was so different. And she goes, and she really didn't quite get it. And then, but she was really into it. And I said, no, at his camp, people are going to learn.
Yeah.
They had this slogan, "Learn tennis, you'll never forget." So right. The adults did the same thing as the juniors, holding your balance. And they loved it. Yeah. Because, come on, you got to be able to hit the ball.
Yeah, it's information.
But most adult camps, there's a round robin, there's a barbecue.
Drilling.
I even remember when I worked for All American Sports, and this was before, I worked for All American Sports before I worked for Welby. And I can remember working in West Hampton, New York, and I was in charge of the camp. Andy was in charge of the whole facility. And anyway, it was every Monday on the weekday program and then every Saturday on the weekend program, I had to run a wine and cheese. There was beer too. I had to run a wine and cheese round robin. Hmm. And I was so green. I was very young, but I said, I'm not doing this. I said, we've been teaching these people all day long. I'm not going to have them come out. And so when they came out, I just started, no, we're going to practice. But the thing was I just made sure we had more wine and more beer, and they loved it.
That's funny.
We're not going to have a round robin. I knew before I should have known that's instruction, destruction.
Yeah. We did the same thing. You probably did as well. I don't know. With the Vic Braden Tennis College, we would do a wine and cheese reception. And usually we talked about brain typing usually during that hour or so. We would go through and kind of meet everybody and then go through a brain typing lecture, but it was the wine and cheese reception. No tennis being played.
Yeah.
But we tried to make it educational.
This gets away from Welby, but
anyway,
in West Hampton, the ocean's across the street and the restaurant and the bar is across the street. It's a beautiful place. And the tennis courts, so some foursome plays, group of men, and they want to order beer. And it has to come from across the street. And I pulled this off. We had 2 Coke machines. and there was one outside and one inside. And you basically just had to put a quarter back in a day. It was a bottle of Coca-Cola. So inside, I had the key, is we put beer in the machine inside. It was really like a little fancy hut. Mm-hmm. And everybody was sworn to secrecy. And they loved it. As I said, you want a beer? And I mean, we just had all these quarters. And I tell you, the pros, how I pulled it out with the pros, they said, if you keep it a secret, everybody, they're going to be more tips. And you get a percentage. You get your fair share. Was this, if there's 5 of us, we're splitting all the tips 5 ways. But, it was so expensive and they had to wait. But anyway, that's getting away from, well, it does come back to low to high, swallow through.
Yeah, but that, some creativity there.
With, so Puerto Rico, Welby put, tennis on the map, 1951, 1991, Caribbean Hilton Hotel, built the culture towards the end of the 50s, starting to produce national players, 4 courts, 600 families. The theory of isolation. There was no shopping and bopping. And actually Bollettieri for years was same island, same city. But Nick, if you go back in the 70s, Nick did some things with junior players. I remember Brian Gottfried was on his court all the time when he was a kid. And Nick did what the Aussies did, is Brian was on the court all day. And Brian would be hitting and Nick would teach. And so he helped out Brian Gottfried. So he wasn't like he didn't have a junior background, but for the longest time, Nick was a resort pro. And he just, at one point on the island, it's not like, people were going to see Nick Bollettieri. It was Welby Van Horn. So Welby had credentials as a player. Talk about the backboard, the pro shop. One thing about playing the hotel guests, but one thing about his job, he was under, like, say, a half dozen. He told me one time 6, 7 general managers, and he, not the entire time he was there, but he basically stayed at the hotel, room and board. He got 100% of his lessons, a small salary, but he got all the court fees and the guest fees. And, you just think, and I've been through it so many times where I was working in a place one time and met with the board, and the general manager was in the room, and they changed my compensation package. And they said to me, Steve, you're making more than the general manager. Yeah. And I thought I had a pretty good comeback. I said, what Babe Ruth said when he was making more than the president? He said, I had a better year. But I was working in the, before kids went to school, I was working in the evenings and the weekends, but they never changed his compensation. He did change where it was in 71, where Welby, talking to Phil Eisenberg about that, when they started tennis camp. So his camp, he obviously kept things going, but so he would, 2 months of the year, he would be teaching juniors. Let's talk a little bit about results with Welby. These are some amazing tidbits, or not tidbits, facts. 1 year at the Orange Bowl, 4 players, 2 championships, 2 finalists. Yeah. Just think about 2 championships, or 2 champions, 2 finalists, and from 4 tennis courts. Yeah. Over a 10-year period, he developed more national champions in the state of Florida. Yeah. He had 11 different juniors that got to national finals. Now, again, some people might think that's such a small number, but that's pure. That's people he started.
Yeah, no recruiting.
And I don't know many people, all the years I've been in tennis, that actually have taken a beginner all the way to being a national champion. Yeah. And I understand that there are coaches. Rob Krychek, one of our previous guests, said so many nice things about the first coach that coached their son Austin, and he just said, "Hey, your son's going to have to go to somebody else because we just don't have the type of program that he needs."
Yeah. Well, and people don't often stay in one place for very long as well.
Well, that's true. When it comes down to a husband or wife, they're both working, one gets transferred. There's
but no, not to downplay it at all. It's amazing.
Yeah, so there's no recruiting, and that's the one thing about academies. It's too bad. That's one downside of American tennis is, we talked to Richard Hernandez to go back. He did such an outstanding job training kids from the province of Ontario. But before some of these recent immigrants have done so well in Canada, they're like, well, we got to leave. We got to go to Florida. And it's like, well, we've got to search for that out of town expert.
Yeah.
So no recruiting. There is that backroom deal where, and again, not to take anything away from Nick, but Nick created that environment. And, I think the consumer in tennis knows now that a lot of times the elite player at an academy, they're there on a full scholarship.
Yeah. Here's your credit card.
Well, that's Patrick Mortogolu. I mean,
Mortoglu or
Tsitsipas.
Okay.
He looked up Tsitsipas on YouTube, and he's 11 years old. He invites him and says, "Here's a credit card. You can." And obviously, they have a very good relationship, but you can keep your same coach. And his father's a billionaire, so I mean he does have that money tree. So Welby was definitely a producer. I mean, it's a strong term. We've used it before from our Irish friend. I just love it. You're either a producer or you're a parasite. There are people who are just living off the game. If you're doing what Welby's doing, like, okay, this is a beginner kid. He's a member of the tennis club I teach at. The kid's got to learn how to play.
Yeah.
With Daniel Coyle's book, The Talent Code, where he talks about small pockets.
Yeah, great book.
Welby created one of those small pockets where it's like, okay, here's a place in the world where something really special is going on.
Yeah.
And granted, it is an island. There's a joke about why can't they play soccer well in Puerto Rico? Is that, and the punchline is that the ball always goes in the water. But with and maybe they do play tennis or play soccer better than the joke indicates. But he definitely created one of those small pockets.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as we go through this. People really should know more about it today, but even back then. Let's talk about Ed Weiss in his book. It is The Secrets of a True Master, Welby Van Horn and His Tennis Teaching System. Secrets of a True Master, Welby Van Horn and His Tennis Teaching System. Ed.
Yeah, you might be able to find it. You can't get it for very cheap, but you might be able to find it online.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have in my notes here with Ed's book. He's a lawyer up in Connecticut. He plans on retiring in 2 years. He was going to retire sooner, but the pandemic is, with young associates that he's been training, they are training people remotely. He just told me that it's slowing down the process of training people to, come on up and take his position. Yeah. But he's discussed republishing the book with Stuart Welby's son. But with the book, and Ed is a contributor, a volunteer, a teacher, fan of inner city program. I've been up there and worked with his pros, and but a few more things about Ed is he has a very impressive tennis background. He's an All-American, part of a national championship team at Swarthmore. Bright guy. He went to Stanford. I asked, I said, okay, we could get podcasts, talk about podcast follow-ups. We mentioned a follow-up with Jim Burdick. We could get easily 3 people I talked today. You could have a podcast with Manny Diaz. In fact, I had asked him some time ago, and he said yes. Yeah. But with Philip Eisenberg or with Ed. So this is what Ed said. He said, just give me 3 things. And he said, with Welby, you can teach tennis with young kids by just having them put their hands on their hips and play the old game as Simon Says. So they're on, their hands are on their hips, and you say, okay, Simon Says, body position for the forehand volley.
Yeah.
And then if you don't say Simon says, they just stand there and look at you.
Yeah.
And then if they make the move without Simon says, they're out.
Yeah.
But teaching the body balance positions.
Yeah. Again, you can find those body balance positions on our Tennis Intelligence Applied course.
Yeah. We touched upon this. He also said that Welby would simplify to the littlest detail. And we've already touched upon that. Like just where are the feet?
Yeah. Attention to detail.
With also too is that, the third point is just that a world-class player developed such a great program for starting beginners.
Yeah.
And really, I've never seen anything better as far as how to start it off.
Yeah.
With books, Jim Layton, who I never had the privilege of meeting, I have communicated with one of his former players, but he coached at Wake Forest for a long time, dedicated student and teacher of tennis. He wrote a book called Inside Tennis, and that covers Welby's system. With Manny Diaz, I asked him a few things today, and he was like talking to a little kid. I mean, he's a year older than I am. Giving him a hard time, those guys with all their hair, but he looks a lot younger than his age. But he's a former student, NCAA coach, winning coach, University of Georgia. Mm-hmm. What he said about Welby, highly intelligent, deep thinker, so insightful. His system was easily duplicated, and the results were so evident. Mm-hmm. That comes back to Arthur Ashe's.
Yeah.
I mean, get a ready position, turn. And go back and you look at how Charlie Passarelli hit the ball.
Yeah.
Passarelli, you can look at this on YouTube. He played a famous match. You just put in Passarelli Gonzalez. It was a fantastic match, and Gonzalez was, I think, 41 years old. And you could see her clear as day.
Yeah.
Being around Welby, this is Manny again, was always a wow moment. He talked about how Welby organized a professional tournament in Puerto Rico, and everybody came. And he goes, it was just so much fun to listen to Welby break everybody's game down. Mm-hmm. He said Welby was the ultimate competitor. He goes, I don't think he ever lost at anything. When it comes down to backgammon or, you name the game, Welby, this is what he said, you name the game. And, they could be horseshoes, whatever it is. You name the game, and Welby's going to figure out how to win.
Yeah, competitor.
One thing he said, John Isner is the best player in America for a long time now.
Yeah.
I don't know John, but I've talked to him a couple of times. My son used to practice with him. He was at Saddlebrook, which is in Tampa. And, I had the opportunity to take, whether it was Raven Klaassen or Austin Krajicek or my son out there to practice.
Yeah, he spoke highly of Connor's game, especially on grass. I had a chance to talk to him one time.
Yeah, you got together with him at the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah, actually, it was just a chance meeting. I was with my wife, and we were out to get some frozen yogurt, and he was at the same place.
but you needed some tickets,
but
right?
Yeah, he actually helped us get tickets. Connor set that up, and John got us tickets to the Hall of Fame so that I could watch Vic's induction. No,
he's a really nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
His name came up because we talked to Matt Clore. They were a year apart and grew up in North Carolina. Mm. But I ran into him, trying to think of farmer's market, whatever, Whole Foods. And I told Manny this today. I said, tell me, how did Manny hit the ball? And John Isner just said, old school. But with what he said today, he said John would have made hundreds of thousands of dollars more if he had the backhand grip on the backhand volley.
Yeah.
So that's one thing about, Manny coming in, and, it's completely different when you start with an 18-year-old freshman versus an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
So you start, it's really a challenge. It's a greater challenge, I think, to work within someone's game than to work with someone's game. Yeah. Philip Eisenberg, the owner of the camp, with his wife Betsy. I told you about how the idea came about, that you're asking about peer teaching. The system is so simple. Of course, these kids could be able to teach, just a compact, short, circular swing.
Yeah, body balance positions.
With For Philip, I mean, it really became, kind of $1 million hobby, because during the heyday of the tennis boom, they had, over 200 kids a week. They just took over the Choate campus. Welby, some things he said. Welby was tough. Welby, I'm sure he didn't grow up drinking coconut water.
Yeah, no.
With
man's man.
He said that the kids would sometimes call him Welby Van Scorn instead of Welby Van Horn. Different times, but the kids that were his kids in Puerto Rico, they were aspiring to be junior champions.
Yeah.
Obviously, they could handle Welby much easier than a camper. But Welby was just frank, very honest, and a lot of times young kids, they don't get a dose of reality.
Yeah. But also, it's like going back. It reminds me of the statement of Maria Sharapova and her father that, hey, I realized that he was for me and not against me.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I mean,
it's like, hey, we're for you.
Yeah, kids so many times. We break it down. Two types of people: the survivor and the victim. And that's where if the parents coming in with a helicopter, they're not helping the victim; they're actually making the victim weaker.
Snowplow, and then it ends up being the submarine.
Yeah, with
down.
Yeah, I know one dad used to say that his wife, the mother of his children, had 2 pieces of red carpet. He would set one down, next one down, and then the kid would walk behind and put their feet on the carpet. With Welby initially, just like I was talking about Molly Nickel, the consumer initially, can they appreciate what he's doing? It's really slow. There's that phrase, it's happy, busy, good. Yeah. It looks like they're doing what all the top players do, and it's really organized chaos. You can go to a tennis club. We talked to Dave Anderson, and they do this really well. If kids have strokes, this is a great drill. They call it they call it 3-zone, I think. It's a doubles attack drill. You know it. Yeah. Some places they call it tennis Olympics or jail or whatever. Yeah. So you put 2 players on one side, and you could put 2 lines of many players on the other side. So you got 8 people on a court. And actually when they do it, many times there's like 2 courts next to them that are empty. Yeah. So it's a doubles drill. You feed the first ball in as an approach shot. If they make it, they tag up, go back to baseline. Then you feed another ball. They have to come and play it as a volley. And if they win, they go back. Then you feed a lob up. And then if they win 3 points in a row. They get to run to the other side, and everybody's totally into it. Yeah. It's a terrible drill if kids have no strokes. Yeah. It's just like, oh. And actually, a lot of I've traveled and worked with so many pros and programs. So sometimes I'm paid to go someplace and just observe. Mm-hmm. And that's how they end the program. And the kids, I want to come back. This is so fun. Sure. The only business is a repeat business. But if you've been trained by Welby, you look at that and go, that's tragic. That is so sad. And then the one thing too is, people ask me, well, who are you cheering for? You watch a tennis match. Yeah. And I said, well, I'm going to cheer for the person who makes tennis teaching easier. Exactly. And so with, I love Nadal, but when it comes down to, I like to watch how a Djokovic, positions himself and strikes the ball. He would be more of the player to copy. Yeah. With Philip, Welby was so honest. Obviously they a business together, but he's never going to make a bad call. But he was never going to give a bad lesson. And when you think about it, is that I think that not that all pros drink beers, but it's like we used to call, well, that's a Miller Lite lesson, meaning that the coach is going to give the lesson and it's a little beer money. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, that kid. Can you look that kid in the eye and go, all right, I can sleep tonight because I know I did my very best trying to get you to hit the ball better. I mean, if you got to stand on your head. Here's something that Philip said. It's sad that the consumer, they don't know whether the lesson is good or bad. A lot of times a parent, they're going to bring their kid back because the coach is likable, the charisma.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, that was great. Here's one thing with Welby and Philip. They put it together. Really, my contact or my connection with, I spent some time with Joe Brandy, but I spent a lot more time with Andy Brandy. But so the Brandys had so much to do with my connection with Welby. But whether the title was national coach or lead coach, but I was offered to be the national coach of Puerto Rico. And hindsight, I remember a guy named Bob Larson. I don't know if you know Bob, a writer.
Bob. Yeah.
Remember him telling me that
his son Court.
Telling me his son's, what's his name?
Court.
It's a great name for a tennis player.
Yeah, the Daily Tennis News.
Yeah, but I remember him telling me that I should have taken that job. That was a long time ago, but there was a lot of travel, and at that time I had two little boys. The idea was to go and carry the torch. That's what we're trying to do. Is, is when it comes down to kids need to get good information.
Yeah.
On situations, Welby's was pure. What do we mean by that? He was teaching beginners. That's what's needed in tennis. Teach the people that are right in front of you. That's the largest group. That's the bottom of the triangle. I don't think it's a matter of always trying to recruit players. I think some of the Welbyites, I know you and I have been called Bradenites, but I think it's an honor to be called a Welbyite as well. Joe Brandy, he worked at Hopman's and at Bollettieri's. His daughter, Christina, became 27 in the world. And it's always puzzling. I remember asking him about it because she was obviously 27 in the world. She grew up in those environments. And, she didn't have the complete game. She was a fighter, a counterattacker. And, Andy, he also worked at Hopman's and Bollettieri's. Then he was at the University of Florida, just like Manny Diaz, with college kids. I remember when I was working with Andy, shortly afterwards, he was working with an American gal, Bonnie Kaduzak, and she became top 10 in the world. And, but I do think so many of the Welbyites, Victor Maya, I'll mention a few things about Victor. I listened to him recently on a podcast. He moved from Puerto Rico to Michigan, and he's in business, but he had a lot of success, or is continuing to. Not sure if he's still doing it. Again, he's my age with in high school tennis. But in all fairness to some, people in tennis, they're not in that position. So if you're the head coach at the University of Georgia or Andy at the University of Florida, you're working at places like Hopman's and Bollettieri's. Yeah. But I really think for the grassroots level teacher, somebody who's at the municipality, they're at the park and rec, we need to do a much better job with tennis in the U.S., all over the world for that matter. I know you talked about the record. Welby has a film. I should have asked Philip about that today. I've looked on the internet.
Yeah, I can find it.
But you would go in with this camp, the first day you're there, you would watch the Welby Van Horn film, and it's just so simple. This is what you do with your body. This is the shape of the swing, and then repeat.
Yeah.
I mentioned that with a tennis racket, that choking up on the racket, number one tennis tip, control. Here's the Victor Amaya deal. This is a fun story. Is that Victor Amaya moved to Holland, Michigan, and he's 6'7", left-handed, huge serve, and he got to be 15 in the world. He was in '78. He almost beat Borg, and Borg was winning he won 5 Wimbledons, and I think it was to knock him out after. If he had beat Borg, Borg wouldn't have won his 4th. I think he had won 3. I'm actually at my parents' place, and so this writer from the New York Times goes from New York City to North Carolina, and I was with Welby. It was a breakfast meeting, and I was allowed to sit in this interview. And the writer was there to ask, can Victor Amaya beat Borg at Wimbledon this year? And, the draw's not even out. But Borg was in the news. And so Welby, the way he talked to this writer, he said, well, I taught Victor when he was younger, and this is what he needs to do on his forehand. This is what he needs to do on his backhand. And it was just so black and white, like boom, boom, boom. And even to the point where he's going, well, Victor, when Borg is serving and Victor can hit his left-handed forehand, if he could hit it better, if he could do this, Borg on the backhand volley, and that was Borg. That's, he struggled in the backhand volley. Why Borg was better on grass than at the U.S. Open when the U.S. Open moved to Flushing Meadows in '78, because for 3 years it was on clay. It was on hard turf at the Old Forest Hills. It went from grass to clay to hard. That's where Connors has won the tournament on 3 different surfaces. Yeah. So Borg on bad grass, he really would cut his backhand volley, very much like Ivan Isavic. Yeah. But so his writer is there, and Welby was just being Welby, where it's like, well, the left-handed forehand, if Amaya would just do this a little bit, this is what we taught him when he was a kid. He's strayed away from that, and this is what he needs to do into Borg's backhand volley, because he's got to be able to break Borg. And he talked about where he directed his first volley. It was just pure Welby.
That's great.
With I can tell you this story. Welby, he lived to be 94. I actually took the Todd Goldman. Todd Goldman owned his own tennis magazine. One time I took Todd because there's he was down in Lake Worth, right by Palm Beach, and I was down there for tournaments all the time. And it's like, okay, let's go see Welby Van Horn. Yeah. And so watching a televised match with Federer, I mean, he was, obviously Welby was Dr. Balance nut, and Federer is, he just floats across the tennis court. But Welby was still studying tennis, and I mentioned in Ed's book about Welby knew he missed the mark where everybody did, but that and really that was, I would say, the flaw in his system was just the forehand. And that was really throughout.
Closing the racket.
Yeah. I can remember taking a lesson. Peter Burwash came to Tyler Junior College where I was running this program. He was the first headliner to come in, and he said, anybody have a lousy forehand? I raised my hand. I'm in charge. So, and Peter just said, you need to turn your grip this much this way. And here's something. Welby never spoke at a USTA conference. And Welby was different, in his own way. I mean, he wasn't a rah-rah. He wasn't going to go be patting people on the back and, networking. And it was just, this is the way it is. And never consulted, never presented at conferences. And to this day, I think federations and organizations, clubs, schools, they should know the Welby Van Horn method. Yeah. But I was in New York one year to help Vic, and one of our former students, Craig Talley, he was with us for a long time, and he was there with John Lafayette, who lived with us when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And John, he did well in pro doubles, and he was a Davis Cup captain, Fed Cup captain in South Africa. So it's Talley, John Lafayette, and a pro by the name of Bruce Lipka. And he had, at that time, I think it was 2 kids. He had 2 little kids, but so the Roosevelt, the National Tennis Teachers Conference, was a big deal every year at the U.S. Open. Yeah. But Talley gave a Welby Van Horn lesson. It's like, just like Ed Crass said, you can put your hands on your hips and play Simon Says. So he's got these little kids. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing about the people I trained to teach tennis is that.
Did he mention Welby?
I was going to say that I would say no, 100% no. But the reason for that, though, it's not promotion or anything, is that my former students, many times, they don't know where the information comes from. So it's the systems of systems. And like Tyler never met Welby Van Horn, but he knew the Welby Van Horn system. Right. At one point, he really didn't know Braden, but he knew the Braden system because we just studied it.
No, I hear that all the time with different people that teach online that you've trained or trained the people that train them, and they say different things. And yep.
Here's a story on Charlie Passarelli. So Charlie, one year I heard him speak at the the National Teachers Conference. And Peter Burwatch had a traveling show where the kids, not the kids, the pros, some of them could juggle 3 rackets and juggle 3 tennis balls all at the same time and do backflips. And it was very entertaining. Mm-hmm. It was definitely a tough act to follow. So this is typical of what Welby would have done. So again, it's very entertaining and great for tennis, fun. So not being negative towards the traveling show, but so Charlie Passarelli, I think he just deadpanned it like his coach would have, and he just said, "I didn't bring any dancing bears."
Yeah, I love that.
But he with Arthur Ashe, Charlie Passarelli, they started the NJTL, National Junior Tennis League, but they changed the L to learning, National Junior Tennis Learning. And you helped me out in Memphis. They were an NJTL program. Ed Weiss. Ed Crass is a pro in Tampa, senior moment. But Ed Weiss up in Connecticut, they're an NJTL. And the reason I'd put this in the notes is Ed's place, and we went out to Memphis, but every NJTL should know the Welby Van Horn system.
Yeah.
One thing about the Welby Van Horn system, if you know it, it'll just help you with your group dynamic skills, especially here during the pandemic where a lot of coaches, it's tough, financial situation where you should be able to go out and have a buddy system, two kids pair up and just, with really good group dynamic skills, you can, all right, everybody, this is a balanced position. And if you can then teach people to, serve first without a ball, then you self-fed ball, and then your partner tosses you the ball.
Yeah.
And if they toss the ball to you and you go through it, Welby Van Horn, swing slowly, hit, hold, freeze.
Yeah.
And then the kids can catch, I toss to you, you hit it right back, I can catch it. And then learning takes place. It's like John Wooden. Don't mistake activity for learning.
Right.
And again, I sound so doom and gloom, but most junior programs, it's just activity. No, and, people aren't going to learn. People don't learn how to play. All you have to do is say, "This is your high performance program."
I think that line from Charlie with the dancing bears is pretty much what you see. I mean, it's the same thing online as well. People love the dancing bears.
I know. I think
lots of tension and not a whole lot of substance, but there are dancing bears.
No, and I think in the USTA, from my observations from a distance, it needs to become less of a carnival.
Yeah.
The commercial, people around the world, the USTA spent a lot of money on this commercial. Cute little girl comes out. It's a U.S. Open commercial. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen it in recent years, but it was on for several years. Mm-hmm. Girl tosses the ball up in the air, puts her racket in the frying pan position. The ball comes down and hits her in the head, and it isn't that cute?
Yeah.
Welby Van Horn wouldn't think that was cute.
Yeah.
She's I tell little, kids all the time. We're helping Matt Clure's daughter. She's just a little kid, 8 years old, and Cammie, Cammie, you want to be a cute girl or you want to be an athlete? She already is a cute girl. And they look right at you. I want to be an athlete. Yeah. So then start treating them like an athlete, exactly. And the sooner the better. And again,
and to get a right start, to get a good start. I mean, I just know from personal experience, I couldn't afford lessons, didn't get lessons right away, but I love the game and basically I had to teach myself.
To get to people, we tell them all the time, if you're a true developer of tennis, when you meet a 9-year-old, you don't think they're young. They're halfway the age of 18.
Yeah.
And they're just a little kid. No, they've been around for almost a decade. They're not just a little kid. With another segment of the notes here, Julie Anthony, professional player. There's not many people that, here's their level of competence, plus they're a world-class player, plus have a PhD, like say Alan Fox. Mm-hmm. But Julie Anthony, in her book, she writes a story about Joe Brandy and talk about Welby Van Horn being tough. Parents should hear this, is that Welby, he did, realize that Charlie Passarelli eventually was a big help because he coached, a player became number one.
Yeah.
And with, but Charlie, when he was younger, and he was Joe's cousin. Charlie wanted to quit. And so I didn't know this till I read Julie Anthony's book, is that Joe's older than Charlie, and Joe became top 20 junior in America in the 18s. That means you're a good tennis player.
Yeah.
And so Joe but Joe had polio. One leg was shorter than the other. And Charlie Passarelli's mother said, if your cousin can play tennis on one leg, you're not going to quit.
Yeah.
You know, that thing, don't quit feeling sorry for yourself. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a very, very powerful story.
Yeah.
Here's another segment of the notes. Tennis Magazine. And again, I have a lot of respect for Bollettieri. You know, we talked about Jim Lair telling people, you know, every kid should be able to get a jolt of Nick Bollettieri. This was in Tennis Magazine, and I'm not one really to write a letter. I've written a few, but amateur writer, but more on like, okay, this is how you can teach tennis a little bit better. But I wrote Tennis Magazine, and it was published. And I remember taking the letter to Welby, giving him a copy of the magazine. Is Nick Bollettieri, who lived on the same island, he was quoted as saying, and by that time he's coaching Agassi at Courier, and he said, quote unquote, I never understood the Welby Van Horn classical stuff. So then my letter, you know, I've done over the years, I've done some things indirectly with Nick, but I mean, I had a number of students. I mean, a number, maybe 24, you know, going back to his camp in Beaver Dam that worked for Nick. So my letter basically said, to speculate, could you imagine if all of those kids, that environment that Nick created, and, you know, Nick saw Nick, I love Bollettieri. He's been married 8 times, but only to 7 women. And he's gone bankrupt several times. And I actually was hired. It's interesting to digress. I was interviewed by Robbie Seguzzo to be the director of the Seguzzo Bollettieri Academy. Then I was offered the job, and I said, well, I'll take it if you just become the Seguzzo Academy. Because, you know, I have a lot of respect for Nick, but, you know, he's going to be on the other side in Bradenton, the other side of Florida, Bradenton. You're going to be in Boca. You know, why do you want to be a franchise?
Yeah.
That's going to be the mothership. So it didn't take long for me to tell Robbie. And so anyway, that didn't go over too well with my situation with Nick. Although Nick didn't really bat an eyelash because he was very, very close to Carling Bassett because her father, John Bassett, had done so much for Nick. That's another story. Carling Bassett's dropped off at the Bollettieri Tennis Academy. She's 8 years old, and John Bassett says, here's my daughter. She wants to be a great player. You write the check, and he goes, I'll come back and check on her in a couple of weeks. People kind of look around and go, okay, this guy means business. So he comes back in a couple of weeks, and he says, hey, I brought you guys a gift. And they go outside, and it's 2 brand new Mercedes buses. I mean, I guess they were the second wealthiest family in Canada. Nice. So coming back to this letter I wrote, I said, can you imagine speculating if all those kids were taught by Welby?
Yeah.
And Welby, I got this down, Welby would be the first one to say, you hang onto the racket like a violin. It's a stringed instrument.
Yeah, that's cool.
You don't hang onto it like a baseball bat. Well, Jim Courier, his backhand, he hung onto it like a baseball bat.
Yeah.
And grip underneath. And when Roddick was inducted in the Hall of Fame, he goes, well, I'm glad Jim is sitting behind me because he's got a crappy backhand too. I mean, Roddick recently was on a podcast. He goes, I don't think I ever hit a topspin backhand in my life.
Yeah.
Takes the racket low, goes outside in.
Yeah.
But you just have to put your imagination to it, is that he could have got Jim Courier's attention if he coached him. I have in my notes, it would say Roddick or Agassi, 3 great American players.
Yeah.
If the guy can beat you left-handed, if the guy can beat you, with, those guys obviously were pretty good, but Welby would be able to go out and say, okay, all right, kid, I'll spot you. And that's, I'll tell you what, I'll play you a set and give you 14 points. He was big on doing that.
Yeah.
14 points is pretty big. We only have to win 24.
Yep.
But, no, Courier would have changed his backhand and he would have been a better player. Mm-hmm. Roddick would have had a backhand too. I think of Agassi on his volleys.
Yep.
Welby, Welby would have kids sit on the court and feed them balls.
Yeah.
They're sitting on the court, and then he would hit to them. So that's how good he was with the racket. So kids sitting on the court, he'd have their body be at a 45-degree angle, and the racket, you're not going to let the racket go below the wrist because your fanny's on the court.
Yeah, that's a great drill.
But yeah, that's interesting and not to take anything away from Nick, but Nick really didn't work on weaknesses. He went with strength. So Anacon's there, and he's coming in and everything. So there was the exception to the rule, but for the most part, forehand.
Yeah.
Jimmy Arias, who's good friends with Nick, and we've mentioned his forehand in the past.
Right.
But he gives Nick a hard time because he didn't have a backhand grip. Welby would have said, "Kids, sit down. You're not playing any tennis. You're going to stand right here, and we're going to teach you how to hit a backhand."
Yeah.
But there's the one thing too, is that would people accept it? Awareness, acceptance, commitment.
Yeah.
More on Arthur Ashe. He was great friends with Charlie Passarelli. UCLA. I compare Welby to John Wooden. Just fundamentals. Mm-hmm. But it was more than fundamentals. He just commanded respect. Obviously making people just increase their awarenesses and their competitiveness. But Arthur Ashe, here's another quote. If I had to send my kids to learn the game, I'd send him or her to Welby Van Horn. He has the best track record, and you don't get that by accident.
Yeah.
Tennis camps, we mentioned, Learn Tennis You'll Never Forget, 200 campers, adults and juniors. Juniors taught the same. Mm-hmm. When I went to work at the Welby Van Horn tennis camp, I had already taught, quite a bit of tennis, and I'd been a camp director for All American Sports, and I show up and they have half day training sessions, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. And so it's like, okay, go listen to Welby for 4 hours and then go hit balls or whatever. Mm-hmm. If you were in the morning session, had the afternoon off. So I asked if I could just go to both sessions. And it's interesting that they didn't think I had any confidence at all. So they put me with they put me with another teacher and put me with younger players. And but by the end of the first summer, they had me. I was only there that one summer, and that's where I thought it was going to be one and done, mm-hmm. being around Welby. It was a couple of years later, they were hiring coaches, and then, it was just circumstance where Piners, Boca, and then, all the time I spent with them.
Isn't that where Welby came up to you one time and said, hey, you might actually be able to teach this game?
Yeah, so you have to think, over 200 people, I don't know how many coaches they had, 40, 30, a ton. And you have your clipboard, and you had to have your clipboard with you, and your name was on the back of the clipboard. And it wasn't like when you go to work for Welby, he's going to give you the bear hug and pat you on the back. And so he was watching me teach, and I'd been there for, a few weeks, and he came up and he just took my clipboard and he turned it over and didn't say anything. He walked away, but then he knew who I was.
Yeah.
And then he came by and he talked to me one time. He goes, I think that one day you might be able to teach tennis. So that was his standard. He wanted the kids to have the best camp experience, but it was like, this is not really, there was no way. He's such a master that there was no way people were going to teach. It's like with Vic one time, the Vic Braden Lanes, I had like 10 students from Tyler Junior College, and there was that coach's room.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, Vic, come here for a minute. Let's watch these kids hit balls.
Yeah.
And Vic really didn't like to watch his coaches teach.
Right.
Actually, Vic digressed, where he used to, at the Kramer Club, he'd have to go have lunch where he couldn't see kids hit the ball because he couldn't take a bite out of a sandwich. Yeah. Some kids hit the ball lousy.
Yeah.
Welby's the same way. For me, when I see somebody hit the ball badly, it's like fingernails across the blackboard.
Yeah. It's hard not to say anything.
Number one theme for Welby, again, maybe fifth time we're saying it: slow down, self-evaluate, learn to feed balls in the hitting zone. We said gone through some of these things. Here's another story. Colin Lee. When I first went to the camp, Colin Lee, tennis player, soccer player from England. He's been so many years in Connecticut. He works with Betty Blake. He watched James and Thomas Blake grow up, at a club in Connecticut. So he, followed my career and was like, okay, I know Steve's got some kids to win some NCAA titles or national USTA titles. So he very politely, and he came several times, but the first time I calls up and goes, hey, can I come down and spend some time with you at your tennis school? I go, yeah, that'd be great. Got a place where you can stay. And he's teaching tennis all these years. And he shows up and he had planned on seeing something different. So he shows up and, I was basically doing the same thing that I learned from Welby. Did we tweak it? Like say, for example, Braden on the forehand, where, Vic was looked at being radical.
Yeah.
Like that's taboo. How could you tell someone to, close the racket face on the forehand?
Yeah.
I touched upon that with Vic, and Welby. Then it was fun for me to, say, when I was working for Vic, is like, he was curious, how did Welby teach tennis? Because he goes, I hear he does all these things with balance.
Yeah.
Here's a Welby drill. You take kids on a picnic table, it's a permanent bench. Yeah. And, usually a picnic table is, it's a park and it's grass and kids don't have a chance, they're not going to get hurt.
Yeah, or have them sign a release.
Is you just have kids, they're on the picnic table and they have to be able to serve.
Yeah.
So then you take that idea and you go out and say, okay, I'm going to buy a 4x4 and it's going to be about the size of a skateboard, and you're going to have kids stand on that and they have to be able to serve. Yeah. You can do things on a physio ball. Can you toss, and do kids have balance?
Yeah.
So there's so many things here. Welby's favorite student, I tell you that story. Actually, Todd Goldman asked Welby this question, and I'd have to think about when Ed Weiss's book came out, but this story is in Ed Weiss's book as well. Mm. So Todd asked Welby, who's your favorite student? Mm. He didn't say me. So, I was thinking he was going to say Charlie Passarelli. Yeah. He said his favorite player was an adult camper. And it was a guy who had played 3 sports growing up in high school. And Welby talked about he played football. It was what everybody did back in the day. Is that he played football and got tough in the fall. And this winter he played basketball. It was very coordinated. Played baseball. So he had the hand-eye for hitting, but he had the service motion from throwing. Mm-hmm. Favorite student. And I remember Todd Goldman was really impressed with the story. He said he did play college basketball. I think it was in the ACC. But he was a really good basketball, really good athlete. Mm-hmm. So he goes to Welby's camp, and he goes to the adult camp, which they run just like the juniors. Hands on your hips, ready position, turn, balance, shape of the swing, hit and hold, freeze. These are the grips. And, I mean, it's just so simple.
Yeah.
So guy loves it. He's successful. So he can afford to come back to the camp, rearranges his schedule, comes back to the camp at the end of the summer, first summer. So this is where it really gets special. He leaves the camp, drives to the airport. And back then it wasn't a cell phone. It was like he intentionally missed his flight, drives back to the camp, says, Welby, I'm glad you're still here. I got one question I didn't ask you. I want to ask you. And that's why he became Welby's favorite student. He said, how do you keep score? And, winning is a byproduct of skills. That was always Welby's message.
Yeah, I didn't care about the competition right away and compete.
He just understood sport. So you got to develop the skills. And, Welby with a mishit, you're not playing my song.
Yeah, that's not my song.
How that happened, if you read Ed's book, is that Welby would have people close their eyes, and he was so big on learning by sight and sound, and you have to hear the ball to know the speed of the ball. So anyway, and Welby was so good. I mean, this is not so easy for people to do. We have kids who miss hit the ball like every fifth shot, and their heads are shifting. They're pulling open with their front shoulder, and guys, and people think I'm tough. Welby, somebody mishits a forehand. It's like, everybody sit down. It's just going to talk to everybody for 20 minutes. And but anyway, so what happened was it was a female camper, adult lady said he intentionally could mishit the ball. That's how good he was. So he hits one on the strings and then one on the wood. And he does it several times, and the lady goes, "That second one, that's my song." But he used that as a line.
Yeah, that's great.
With strokes, here it is. You're not hitting the ball. You're not ripping the ball. You're not grinding. You're not pushing. You're not blocking. You're not smashing. You're not driving. Yeah. Like even the volley, it's a stroke. Yeah. And when you think about stroke production, you don't hear that so much anymore. You're going to a junior development program. Yeah. That means you're a junior and you have to be developed. Yeah. And then the next thing, junior development, and it's stroke production. Yeah. And it's like, no, we have to be able to produce strokes. And that's gone away. Mm-hmm. Here's another fun story. Welby, and many times in Choate, there's many courts on campus, is that the adults and the juniors would be there it was like a little stadium setting, a lot of bleachers. And so everybody in the camp is there. So it's 200 plus people. And it's got to be 30, 35 coaches, counselors, administrators, big operation. Mm-hmm. So adult raises his hand, says, Welby, says, "This is just classic. Could you talk about strategy?" And Welby said, "No."
That's the best.
No. Vic used to do this where he would say, "You want to learn how to win without a forehand, backhand, serve, and volley." Yeah. But then Welby, he's just such a logical and analytical thinker and it's so true. You come back to John Wooden. John Wooden never mentioned winning. Winning takes care of itself. Yeah. Lou Holtz, the acronym WIN, what's important now? He used to show photos. I know it's amazing. We're Vic did so many things with high-speed film. Welby did it with his eye, and he certainly used sequences. I mean, he really thought Todd Martin towards the end. Todd Martin came up, and
solid.
Overall, that he just had very, very good strokes.
Yeah, pretty classic.
Pearls of wisdom from Welby: tennis is not easy. Avoid frustration with lots of drudgery in the beginning. If mom and dad are listening to this, tennis parents, if your kid comes home and goes, "I don't like it. I don't like practice," you have your kid in the right place. If they come home and they love practice, typically what happens is kids love practice Monday through Friday, and then they go to the tournament on the weekends, and they're crying because they can't play. I mean, it's no fun to lose, and it's really tough. Welby understood that with get kids prepared, because it's much easier to lose if you're playing pickups or you're playing team soccer. You're playing on a Little League baseball team. Mm-hmm. You lose and you go to Pizza Hut. Misery enjoys company. Yeah. There's consolation to like, okay, we're together on this.
Still get a snow cone.
Yeah.
I think, look, if you could find a place, I feel like we do a pretty good job where you can make it enjoyable. You're having fun, learning fundamentals.
But it has to be a sport.
Exactly.
It's, and then also too, you think about the parents, the kids for the most part are not paying for it. The parents, they need to get, value for time, value for money.
If you're into it for a sport, some people may be into it just for, hey, just an activity, fun, get some exercise.
Well, but even that though, when it comes down to Welby Van Horn, adult tennis, safe tennis, he used to say that. you got to teach kids safe tennis. They swing like this, they're going to get injured.
Yeah.
So the myths, there's just so many myths, just things that are passed down over the years that it sounds like it's true, but it's not true. Proper instruction accelerates the learning process. With tennis, when team sports, you want to have kids certainly develop their legs and develop hand-eye coordination, playing catch and kicking a ball and whatever. So this is in the notes. Losing in tennis, early ages, it's devastating. And, I want to play a tournament, go get your release, go kick a ball, go run. Why set yourself up for failure? Welby, this is on the record. Being interested in keeping score before you develop skills is totally ridiculous. I mean, it's like the kid playing basketball. Can we scrimmage, coach? No. Yeah. You can't even dribble. And that's John Wooden taking the best blue chip athletes for UCLA and going, today we're going to teach you how to throw the chest pass.
Tie your shoes.
Yeah, we have a video of in the libraries. John Wooden teaching players how to put socks on. Yeah. Thin sock, heavy socks, so then no one's going to get any blisters.
Right.
Competition can wait. Competition will always be there. Touch of an elephant. Like on the forehand, I'm always telling kids in the mini tennis, especially, get that left hand on the racket.
Yeah.
So then your shoulder can be loose, and you got to be able to use the left hand. Mm-hmm. Usually, the left hand's the culprit. This is a Van Horn phrase on the backhand: more than sideways to stay sideways. Mm-hmm. When you hit a backhand, the trailing hip is higher. Mm-hmm. To repeat this, have strokes by the time you're 8. No need to play tournaments until you're 10. Now, granted, they do have now short courts, a 60-foot court.
Right.
And they have the green dot ball going backwards, the orange and the red. And I think it's great. They're great training tools. I was telling someone last night, someone who follows our content, that people aren't playing better because the green dot, the transition balls have been around for 10 years. Okay, the ball is going to bounce lower. They're supposed to have They're supposed to have a lower contact point. Mm-hmm. Kids need to be taught. It's like how could you say otherwise? Oh, yeah, we're not doing math. Yeah, we're not going to teach them to count. We're not going to teach them to add. And I think it'll just work out fine in the end. Yeah,
unfortunately, a lot of that. I see a lot of videos where kids are taking big cuts at balls with the red balls or whatever. And they're making those shots right now, but if you're playing with a real ball, that baby's not going in, with the open racket faces or whatnot.
Welby, a pitfall is watching the pros. And then you touched upon it where, they've been playing for years and years and years. And he talks about improvising and fundamental range of correctness.
Well, if you're watching the pros to try to copy exactly what they're doing,
Well, here's
idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, here's another Welby, is that when you do watch a pro, or even when you watch tennis, don't watch the ball.
Yeah.
This comes from Welby. I do have a few original thoughts, but I'll have a group of people, and you got one person on this end and one person on this end, and they're 20 feet apart, and you say, all right, everybody look at John. Mm-hmm. Everybody look at Ellen. And they're back and forth, and then stop. Mm. Turn to the person next to you, ask what the score is. Okay, back to John, back to Ellen, John, Ellen, John, Ellen. People going like this, like stop. Ask the person next to you, what's the score? Yeah. And that's a tennis audience. Yeah. Vic used to do the thing where you roll a piece of paper up, and, telescope, and you just, you can even do it for colors. You look at a stadium and just say, I'm looking for red. Yeah. Close your eyes. Okay, I'm looking for blue. Because the eye becomes so distracted.
Yeah, he would cut holes in little
3x5 cards,
and watch different body segments.
Now, so when you watch players, especially pros, don't watch the ball. Watch their feet. Watch their racket.
Yeah.
So again, this is Welby. Copying the pros is dangerous. Here's another Welby. We touched upon it. players arrive at a game personality of their own.
Yeah.
Crawl, walk, run, jump. Pay the price. It's not days. It's a decade.
Yeah.
To learn how to play. Sight and sound. Listen to the sound of the ball coming off the string. Like brush the ball. I don't slap the ball. You do get the feeling. It's a myth, but you get the feeling that you can keep the ball on your strings.
Yeah.
Try to play with your ears plugged. He tells a story about Jimmy Connors, where Connors said when he has a cold, the problem is it's not his breathing. You can't hear the ball. You got to be able to hear the ball. Like years ago at US Open, when they moved to Flushing, the airplanes were going over, and you couldn't even hear the ball.
Yeah.
Mike Fishback had the spaghetti strung racket, and one of the biggest problems was you couldn't hear the ball. He strung the racket twice, strings on both sides. We do know that a player will a player will go on statistical cues and they move before the ball's hit.
Yeah.
But again, sound. Yeah. Again, Welby asking about championship mind. Tim Galloway, Welby definitely had the inner game, but here was his comment, because that book came out, best-selling book ever. People asked Welby about the inner game, and he goes, if you have a really good outer game, you can have a really good inner game. Yeah. That's kind of like Braden saying with, we had a young boy visiting here, just told his parents, the kid's dropping the racket and kicking the racket. And I go, this is a Bradenism, same as Welby is. Yeah. The engineering problem causes the attitude problem. Exactly. If your kid he gets up and he goes to the courts and he's a happy camper, but if he's got no backhand volley, he's got no backhand. I mean, it's Jim Lair. To be mentally tough, you need to have strokes that hold up under pressure and be super fit. Yeah,
it's like the best way to work on your mental game is to work on your strokes.
Yeah. And a lot of times people will say, I can remember being younger and people would want a hitting lesson. It's like, here's my money. Don't say anything about my strokes. Gary Alpert, who trained with us, he's a pro in Cincinnati now, and he was giving lessons to a gentleman who wrote the book Eat to Win. I think it was Robert Haas. 2 hours, 3 days a week, whatever. And it's like, he's a young guy in his 20s. He said, don't say anything.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Some people just want to have the activity. And
yeah, that's where, I think parents, tennis teaching is more service oriented than it is education based. Yeah. The coaches are bringing out the basketballs and they're pumping balls, they're out under the hot sun and they're directing traffic, and it's work. But you have to ask yourself, is anybody learning anything here? Because a lot of times, they're getting a little bit better, but people will say, and I used to do this all the time. I could feed balls really fast, and the Braden method, like boom, 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 and we used to call them stress busters. This is before cardio tennis. Michelle Krause, is that a nice lady who ran that for years? I remember she came to our place one time and said, well, Steve, I know you just work with tournament players, but you got to be able to feed the ball really fast.
There you go. Check this out.
No, but anyway, so she had a lot of people showed up for this clinic, and our coaches, we could just, do-do-do. Yeah. Do-do-do. And faster than a ball machine. Yeah. With teaching aids for Welby, got to have a mirror. Got it, a reflection in the window, but you've got to have a mirror. Yeah. I digress. Had two boys. They came to work with me, and we had windows. And I said, you two guys, I want to talk to your mother. Go outside and shadow swing in front of the windows. And they had their back to the window. And they're both scholars, but I had to go over, knock on the window, and go on back in, guys. You guys maybe you're the two dumbest kids I've ever met. No, you shadow swinging, facing the window. Backboard. The stroke developer. I know Tree Torn made it at one time. I saw it recently. So I hadn't seen it for really too many years, but
the ball on the string, right?
Yeah, stroke developer. It has a heavy rubber base, and then it's an elastic cord, and then some rope.
Yeah, you can get them.
And you can actually, Charlie Passarelli used it all the time. You just go out in your driveway out in the street, You can get on a tennis court if you have a court, and you just rally, you hit it. And if you have strokes, it just goes, it's like the little ping pong paddle that has a ball tied to it.
Yeah.
But you have strokes, it goes over, it bounces, it comes back.
Yep.
And it's just rhythm training.
I actually got a couple of those coming from Turna.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have a couple of those, but Welby did this all with private lessons only. Obviously, the camp was different, but what he did, the old model, just private lessons. And then kids going out playing mini tennis, baskets, backboards.
Once a week?
Playing with anybody and everybody. I'd have to ask.
I think that's a question a lot of people ask is,
how many
lessons a week, when they start talking about.
I'd have to ask. I would be off base to say, well, a guy like Charlie Passarelli and he had so many people that went on and did so many great things as players, playing at all these universities and such. But the lessons were half hour. So like Charlie Hollis, his thing was a little bit different where you had to skip rope before the lesson, or Welby's was hit the backboard before the lesson. I would guess, I can find out, but it would be no more than 2 a week. But they were half-hour lessons.
Yeah.
But the thing is that the lesson is repeated. It's not like, well, we taught you the forehand. Welby would want to teach 10 lessons. So when you signed up for 10. Now, whether they were all, once a week for 10 weeks, I don't think so. But you sign up for a package of 10 lessons. With, the sign in the pro shop. Welby, certainly, I've seen these signs. I don't know if Welby had these signs, but he certainly understood these. This is the mentality back in, the 70s where you'd walk in, the sign would say, playing the pro, whatever it was, $20. Beating the pro, no charge.
Yeah.
But also, too, Welby was under the approach where, and I'm going to guess his lessons were half an hour for $10, way back when. So you'd sign up for 10 half-hour lessons for $100. But there was, the sign or the mentality that one lesson is $1,000, 10 lessons is $100. And, why take one lesson?
Yeah.
Why take one lesson?
Yeah.
The word culture, Daniel Coyle's book, The Talent Code, but he also has the
Little Book of Talent.
But no, he has one, the title, it's about building cultures.
Culture Code.
Yeah. With just go one more story and then close here. This is in Ed's book. As time passed, so Welby's 31 years old, so he's getting a little bit older. So he's been teaching there 10, 12 years, and people started to question whether he was really that good a player, even though he's hitting with the kids and whatever. So again, they had a pro tournament, and they asked if they could watch Welby play one of the pros. So this is how Welby's mind worked. He goes, yeah, I'll do that. Why don't you, among the members, raise some money, and I'll play one of the pros. I'm not in very good shape, but I'll play whoever you, and who was in the tournament. It's in the book, Emerson, Ho, there's famous players, Laver. And the listeners probably won't know the name Art Larson, but he won the U.S. Open. So Welby played Art Larson. It was just one set. And it was the same as the non-Don Ball story, is that so Welby's playing go back to the beginning of the podcast, the kid who's number one in India. Welby's, 59 years old, plays one set, and Welby wins. So all his members are watching. So if Art Larson wins, he gets the members' money. Yeah. If Welby wins, he gets the members' money. Welby won 6-2.
Yeah.
But to just close some thoughts I have, is a major problem in tennis is education. People need to learn to teach beginners.
Yeah.
Do you see world-class players teach beginners? No. I would say they can't because they don't.
Yeah.
What do you mean you can't? I'm not trying to offend world-class players, but do you see world-class players teaching beginners?
Yeah.
Do you see NCAA coaches? I remember telling Craig Tiley, I was at Illinois, his team, they went from obscurity to winning the NCAAs, and Bruce Burke, who won it the last time they had it. Mm-hmm. I remember telling Tiley and Burke, I said, you guys don't ever stop teaching beginners. It's skills. If you don't use them, you lose them.
Yeah.
And, some college coaches, I think at Ty Tucker, I like his explanation is that, he just can't talk to 8-year-olds. The way he's just, I really like the way he coaches. He's just, okay, boys, we're going to work here. You don't really see tennis directors. What happens so many times, and this is a major red flag, is you see, some kid with personality, charisma, they get hired, they played a little high school tennis, a little junior tennis, and they get hired to teach the little kids.
Right.
The best teachers need to be with the little kids.
Yeah.
And, the grip of a lifetime. We've been doing a project here with a couple of 8-year-olds, 4 8-year-olds. Yeah. And it is a big deal. Mm-hmm. No, go play a little soccer, go for a run, go ride the bike. But, again, instruction, destruction.
Yeah.
Why don't you see, people in high profile positions teaching beginners?
I know.
It's not easy.
It's not easy.
Okay, you can't be good at it if you never do it.
Yeah.
It should be a train where you got the caboose, you got the little kids, but so like the 18-year-olds, and just think about Welby's culture. So the 18-year-olds are pulling the 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
16-year-olds are pulling the 14-year-olds. Now here in Florida, how it was transpired, I think like you could say, well, tell me about tennis in Atlanta. You go to different cities. Atlanta is just suburbia. And there's all these nice facilities that are hard courts and they're unmanned. Mm. And, a lot of people don't have exposure because they just play tennis in their backyard. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Atlanta book for league play, it used to be as big as a telephone book. But here in Florida, what happens is, it's so divided. So what happens in a subdivision, build a golf course, and then they build houses and townhouses, and tennis is an amenity to golf. So all throughout Florida, it's like, okay, this country club has 6 courts, and this country club, there's a golf course because that's what's going to sell.
Yeah.
And it used to be that, so Welby only had 4 tennis courts. It used to be in Florida that you start in Miami and people, you just go up and, it's, David Park in Hollywood. I go a little further up. There's North Miami Beach, but go all the way down Flamingo Park. Flamingo, North Miami Beach, and there's so many more of them. All these municipalities, David Park, Holiday Park, Memorial Park in Boca. And the top players would congregate. There'd also be a ladder. People would make phone calls and they would call people up. So Welby, one thing to say again, is he was always arranging matches. So he's teaching kids how to hit the ball really well. They're going to the backboard. They're getting their reps. Yeah. And he's finding matches for them.
Yeah. Simple.
With it's capitalism, to just, okay, I'm going to farm the workout. Say, for example, sake of 20 math, simple math, kid pays $20 an hour for a group lesson. And they're going to put 6 kids on the court, so it's generate $120. Well, some young kid, that's a lot more than minimum wage. Yeah. And they just put their right hand, they put their left hip on the ball basket, and they can just feed. And then, the thing is keep, you just hear, keep moving. Yeah. Don't, just the opposite of Welby. No, slow them down. Teach people to teach. But, again, I think avoiding beginners, it might be the biggest problem in all of tennis. Welby, learn tennis you'll never forget. I think his contribution to tennis should never be forgotten. Yeah. And then what we're trying to do is, the mission really is to help people, that want to play the game better, want to teach the game better, And I think we need to follow up with more on Welby and just the body balance positions alone.
Yeah, no, it's been really fun to go through Welby's system again and just rehash over some things. And also listening to that record was really fun. And no, this has been great. It's been a great learning experience as well, just going back through all that history. And yeah, we're going to keep making content with Welby system.
Yeah, I think we have to.
There.
We've talked to some other guests about being on. We need to go through all the different pillars that we have, and we hope our listeners are getting something out of these podcasts.
No, it's been a really good episode. Hopefully, listeners, you've enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us, info@GreatBaseTennis.com, GreatBaseTennis.com. You can find our free courses, Tennis Intelligence Applied. You can find some Welby information in there. Also, our Instagram page @GreatBaseTennis. We're putting up stuff every day.
Hit and hold your balance. If you hit the ball well, you can hold your balance. If you have a lousy contact point, if you're young juniors, parents of juniors, little 12-year-old, you're running back to the fence. You let the ball get above your shoulder. Your head shifts, your front shoulder shifts. You end up, we have some kids, they're not even facing forward, the center of gravity. When you're done hitting a ground stroke, ideally, someone should be able to push you and you run forward.
Yeah.
I think we have that film of young Pete Sampras. Lansdorf's voice is on the tape, but he's just coming in,
Pete's
and you
gonna
can
hit some forehands.
do that again.
Pete's gonna hit some forehands.
Smiley,
something like that.
Smiley Pete. But it's all there. You just have to look at the great players and don't judge the unfinished product. Many times what happens with tennis players, it's tough for parents to hear, tougher perhaps for the kid. Is there a redo? They have to go backwards. They have to take 10 steps backwards to be able to go 100 steps forwards.
Yeah.
And I think that the drudgery, but it's a sport of a lifetime. So I think what happens, when kids are 15, 16 years old, they start feeling like they're too old. And not the case at all.
No, 90 and over nationals.
Yeah, I got some.
You got a long time before you can qualify for that event.
Yeah.
Unless you're 89, then you only got a year.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Appreciate you listening. And we'll see you in the next one. Go practice.